Hey, this is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate first part of what if Kid Naruto was trained by a group of non-humans. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no time. Let's start the story.
Guard duty is typically a dull task. You spend your days standing around, staring at a dusty road, and reading papers. However, there was an intriguing event at the North Gate today. I am an ambassador to Konoha from War Chief Thrall. I was sent to talk to your Hokage, I believe is the name of your leader, said a strange man in flowing robes who rode up to the gate atop a very strange bird. One of the guards questioned, yes, but who in the world is Thrall and what is a war chief? I am not to tell anyone other than your Hokage any more than what I just have. A voice behind the two guards said, it is all right, I've been expecting him, and the two turned around. I'd say you're an important member of the government here, based on your fancy getup, the stranger said, nodding at the newcomer. My name is Sarutobi, I am the Hokage of Konoha. Then, as the strange bird poofed into the smoke and vanished, the stranger dismounted his bird and extracted a crystal. The shinobi around him were looking at him curiously, so he held up the crystal he had removed and explained, I have another one for a nether drake, but he can't exist in this atmosphere yet. I've been working on a way to make it so that he could. Special kind of crystal combined with some sealing, and you have an easy way to transport a mount in places that they couldn't normally go. It puts them in suspended animation so that you don't need to worry about them dying of hunger or thirst. Anyway, shall we go to my office? The stranger followed the Hokage to the Hokage Tower after grinning and nodding. The stranger saw a hyper blur pass by on their way there, followed by 3 more blurs. This scene reminds me of a young blood elf I once knew. He turned to face his companion before continuing. The blood elf was a notorious prankster. Ah yes, Uzumaki Naruto, our infamous prankster, and a damned good one at that, pardon my language. He has become good enough that the village Anbu have a course dedicated to just catching him after a prank. It looks like I've found the ideal person to carry on my legacy, the Konoha visitor reflected. They continued to walk for a few more minutes until they reached a big tower, where they ascended a number of more flights of stairs to reach an office. Sweat fell from the stranger's eyes as he surveyed the office and the massive stack of documents on the desk. He pointed to the big stacks and said, tell me, does anyone ever read those? No, but I have to do them anyway, the Hokage answered. The stranger smiled, and then his hand caught fire. The flames spread to the papers, burning them to ashes without damaging the desk. Sarutobi gazed at the ashes, then at the guilty party, then back at the ashes, and finally at the stranger once more. Then, as he was encased in a bone-crushing embrace, the stranger found it difficult to breathe. Or it would have been for him if he hadn't created a spell that made bones stronger and, in essence, made you a pain in the ass to kill. He wheezed out, I do need to breathe, you know. Oh sorry, I really need to learn that, Sarutobi said. Well, there's something like that in the treaty I received from my Lord Thrall. Anyway, let's get down to business. Lord Thrall wants trade privileges, so we bring weapons and armor of all kinds and with different enchantments. In return, we would ask for food because our livestock have been getting sick a lot more frequently lately, and I know that some of the people would like to try some new cuisine. There's only so much you can get in a desert country. The treaty would also include a brief military exchange. We would send troops of various professions to do jobs for you in exchange for some of your ninja doing missions for us. In the second part, one of your young people would learn skills from us, and one of our young people would come to learn your methods. I personally offered to teach one of your young people, and later today I would like to see which of your most talented young people I can select as my student. The stranger then began making some gestures for a short while before stopping, looking up at Sarutobi, and asking, would you mind if I got something to drink? If war breaks out here, we will send aid as well. Expect the same should we ask for it. If you were to accept, you would become the 6th group to make up the horde. No, go ahead, Sarutobi said, wondering what the motions he had initiated had to do with a drink. He went on to say, thank you, and as he reached in and took out a vial of clear liquid, one of the pouches on his belt appeared to swell. He removed the cork and drank the entire vial before throwing it over his shoulder and vanishing in midair. He then took out another one and held it in front of Sarutobi and said, water? I have a low tolerance for alcohol, so it's pretty much the only thing I can drink. After saying, thank you, Sarutobi took the vial, sniffed it, and took a sip. His eyes widened as he tasted the coolest and best tasting water he had ever experienced. In any case, what are your thoughts on the treaty? If you agree, the aforementioned conditions will be followed, and Konoha will formally join the horde. Where should I put my signature? The stranger grinned, then reached into a pouch and produced a scroll that contained 5 other signatures and all of the aforementioned terms. Sarutobi carefully read the treaty, then glanced at the signed names and arched an eyebrow before signing his own. Sarutobi wondered if he needed glasses as the stranger rolled up the scroll and whirled it around, making it vanish. There, Konoha is a member of the Horde, and Thrall now possesses the scroll. The stranger said, I have some personal requests now. May I at least get your name before that? Sarutobi inquired. It's Linthian, I see. In any case, I'm asking for two things. In order to advance his education, experience, and knowledge, I would like to take my apprentice, our term for student, to different countries throughout the world. I also want to be fully informed about the student I select. You are welcome to observe as I explain the Horde's history to my apprentice. Here in Konoha, I'll do that. That's what I want. Should we visit the academy to let you select your apprentice? Yes, and I would like that. A brown-haired man with a scar across his nose was dragging a tied-up blonde in an orange jumpsuit into the classroom as Sarutobi led Linthian to the academy and walked in with almost all of the clan heirs. All right, we can hear Hokage Sama's statement now that Naruto is present. Hokage Sama, I take it that's why you're here, the scarred man inquired. Indeed, Konoha recently formed a partnership with the Horde, a sizable, international organization. Sarutobi told the students, Konoha is the first shinobi nation to do so, and one of their youths had to come here to learn ninja techniques, and one of our youths would learn their fighting style from Ambassador Linthian here. However, I should let you know that my student will only learn one of the Horde's styles. I would be comparable to someone who does not use taijutsu and almost exclusively uses ninjutsu. I have repeatedly defeated and been defeated in spars by those who only use weapons. Others are skilled at long range and have the ability to tame beasts. With a few skills that are meant to immobilize opponents in my immediate vicinity, I am primarily a long-range user. Finally, I will select my student based on their potential, drive, determination, and personality. Linthian cautioned, if you are not chosen, don't go complaining to your parents because nothing else will convince me otherwise. Linthian then spent the rest of the day observing the students. A few he crossed out easily. Inzuka Kiba was too much of a close combatant for his style. Haruno Sakura had the smarts for it, but her entire personality revolved around Uchiha Sasuke. The Uchiha kid was also thrown out because he had a worse personality than some of the Lich King's minions. And considering that the Lich King's minions were all mindless undead, that was saying a lot. Nara Shikamaru was far too lazy, even though from his observations he had a brilliant strategic mind. The Nara boy's friend Shoji was also unfitted to his style like the Inzuka. The Yanamaka girl was just far too loud in his opinion and gossipy. So far he had narrowed it down to Uzumaki Naruto, Hyuga Hinata, and Aburame Shino. The only reason for the Aburame kid was that he had almost no information from his observations. The boy was just too quiet. Hyuga Hinata seemed to have a confidence problem, but here a couple of his friends could easily change that. The Uzumaki brat was interesting. He had the most raw mana and potential of all the group, but he was loud, a prankster, which was always a plus in his book, and his loudness and the clothes he wore were his biggest flaws. He would watch the three and learn more about their personal lives. Having spent the rest of the day using a spell to spy on the three candidates, Linthian opened his eyes from his meditation and scowled. He had selected his apprentice, but one of the others was in dire need of assistance, and he would discuss it with Sarutobi. He opened the door and left the room Sarutobi had allowed him to use for his spell, and after burning the man's documents once more, he went to the man's office and sat in front of him. He had been sitting for 6 hours and his back was stiff, so he got up and stretched it. Calmly, Sarutobi remarked, you know, there was actually something there I needed that time. If you were to ask his peers, the ones who were still alive or had their minds anyway, when he was growing up, he was the smartest ass in Quell. Thallus. He had calmed down over the years and Arthas's destruction of his homeland, but he still had his moments. So get another copy, Linthian said. I take it you've selected your student? Yes, but there is one other thing, the Hyuga girl. Is she a pupil of yours? No, but she really needs assistance. I was able to observe them going about their daily lives thanks to the spell I cast, and that girl is in dire need of assistance. Well, perhaps her family, I don't mean to offend her, but her father is the reason she is a stuttering basket case because she isn't good at a style that doesn't work for her. She doesn't fit the style her father wants her to adopt, even though I am an outsider with limited understanding of shinobi techniques. I do however know of someone who could help her, and I believe that her style would suit Lil Hinata well. Her name is Droga. She is a shaman and tends to favor both elemental combat and restoration. Healing I believe it is called here. I know that it wasn't mentioned in the treaty, but I think I can figure out a way to make it work. I could also appeal to the council's desire to have powerful shinobi. May I ask who your apprentice is going to be? Sarutobi responded. Uzumaki Naruto. I will begin teaching him tomorrow. Because of the intense training methods I will be needing to use, do not expect him to return to the academy. With a bit of luck, he will be up to your Chunin level by the time the academy takes its graduation exam. Do you think you can do that in 1 year? Most normal genin choose to wait until they have been genin for about 5 years before taking the Chunin exam. Trust me, old man, I have slain demons more powerful than you before. For 2 years I had to teach a bunch of snot-nosed brats to be strong enough to do the same. I've developed a method that works. There is one more thing. I want all information on my apprentice, including the reason that the villagers call him a demon, bastard fox, and that you should have killed him several years ago. Sarutobi flinched. He was not going to get out of this by sneaking. After letting out a sigh, he made the decision to reveal the truth, as they say. 12 years ago, a monstrous demon fox by the name of Kyubi attacked. A demon as powerful as him cannot be killed, so my successor the fourth sealed him into an infant, Naruto. The fourth wished for him to be treated as a hero, but sadly, the villagers only see him as the demon reincarnated. I made a law saying that none may speak of the fact that Naruto contains the Kyubi other than Naruto or me. Huh, you were wrong about one part. There is nothing that can't be killed. Maybe not by anyone mortal, but anything can be killed. There is a massive, inter-dimensional army of demons called the Burning Legion led by the Dark Titan Sargeras. About 5 years ago, one of his most powerful lieutenants Archimond arrived on this world. He is dead. How? I was able to feel a foul power for several months about 5 years ago, but it suddenly disappeared. The Night Elves sacrificed their immortality in the World Tree Nordisil. That was able to kill Archimond, and several hundred acres of forest, Linthian murmured at the end. Anyway, now that you know about Naruto's burden, I will send you a file containing all of the information we have on him. Where will you be staying? Well, since I'm still officially an ambassador, I was thinking about heading around town and try to find a good hotel or apartment for later visits. I kind of like the local scenery. See you later, and no spying when I'm training Naruto. The ambassador to the Horde then went off to find a place to spend the night. He simply rented a hotel room, climbed out of his robes, and collapsed onto the bed because it was pretty late. The following morning, Linthian sat up in bed, opened his eyes, and then stretched his back to listen to some pops. He sighed and summoned some breakfast after rolling his neck to hear a few more pops. When he was done, he took a seat to decide whether to get his apprentice or find a place to stay first. He got his answer from a blur by his window. Then, apprentice, in his free time, he could always go look for an apartment. He changed into a new set of robes and performed a spell that he had mastered. Ignoring a chill, he walked out of the hotel room and went in search of his unaware apprentice. Naruto began preparing his prank with a laugh. Are you planning on setting up a prank? A voice asked as he was ready to lay the first wire. The man who had watched his class yesterday was leaning against a building wall, staring at Naruto as he froze and slowly turned around. Anticipating that this man would label him a demon and begin beating him up like the rest of them, Naruto began to perspire. If so, your method is too sloppy, allow me, the man said, bending down to where Naruto was preparing his prank. He made some quick adjustments, got to his feet, and made some unrecognizable arm gestures before grinning. Then he seized Naruto, pulled him to his hotel room, and began preparing a meal for them. He was aware that his student needed something even though he had already eaten. There was a loud cry of surprise and the sound one makes when someone shoves ice down their shirt after preparing some scrambled eggs and bacon and watching his guest gobble them up. I think my prank has just gone off, Linthian smirked. Naruto patted his stomach and remarked, you know, I didn't pin you as the prankster type yesterday at the academy. Please, I was once known as the greatest prankster ever to live in Quel'Thalas. Once I began my mage training, I started adding those skills into my pranks. I had to stop about 5 years ago though, Linthian said, looking sad as he continued. Linthian scoffed before responding. What happened? Naruto asked quietly, observing Linthian's anguish. I'll tell you in your history lessons. History lessons? Yes, didn't I tell you? I've chosen you to be my new apprentice. A man named Arthas looked up and remarked, I could have sworn I heard something just now. Oh well, after hearing Naruto's joyful cry all the way across Northrend. After Linthian and the other members of Konoha were able to hear again, Linthian approached Naruto and put his hand on the boy's shoulder before stating, come, time to make the apprenticeship official. We will need to go to the Hokage Tower and Sarutobi had asked to sit in on the first few lessons. They will be detailing the history of the world from our point of view and even off this world. Normally Naruto disliked history, but all he had ever heard from it were boring lectures, so he just stared at his sensei. However, Linthian sensei seemed like the type of person who could make learning enjoyable. They were in the Hokage's office without noticing. Linthian entered and set the Hokage's documents on fire once more. With a sigh, Sarutobi raised his head and inquired, "First lessons?" "Yes, I can do it here and project some historical events straight into your minds if you'd like. For the remainder, I'll create illusions as I explain what transpired. Our first section will cover the time before the world was created. I only have access to this information because I have friends who share my interest in history and who get it from otherworldly sources. In any case, a group of gods known only as the Titans existed thousands of years ago. They created worlds and life as they journeyed through the cosmos. They eventually discovered that a group of demons known as the Burning Legion was destroying some of their former worlds. Sargeras, the Titans' finest warrior, was dispatched to either destroy or imprison the demonic army. The deeds he witnessed enraged his heart as he did so. He eventually lost his mind and turned against his former friends. He became their leader and freed the demons he had imprisoned. 5,000 years ago, Sargeras discovered that the planet Argus was home to a race of highly technologically and magically advanced beings who called themselves Eridar. He offered their three leaders, Archimonde, Kil'jaeden, and Valen, enormous power beyond their wildest dreams if they pledged allegiance to him. Only Valen saw through his promises of power that would turn them into demons. With the help of a race of beings known as the Naru, he took a small group and fled Argus, and Valen and his followers were dubbed Draenei, the exiled ones in their own language. This world was made by the Titans 10,000 years ago, and in the middle of it is a pool of magical energy. The pool was dubbed the Well of Eternity by the race of creatures known as the Night Elves, who built a magical civilization around it. The demons of the Burning Legion were eventually brought here by the Highborn, a band of Night Elves who were the Queen's most powerful attendants. The Well of Eternity was destroyed during a conflict known as the War of the Ancients, and the Burning Legion was exiled back to the shadowy hole from which they had fled. Kalimdor and Azeroth, two sizable continents, were created out of the world. We think that shinobi first arrived on Kalimdor 2 or 3 centuries ago. Less than half a century ago, the Orcs and Draenei lived peacefully on the world of Draenor. However, the now demon Kil'jaeden slowly corrupted the most respected of the Orc shaman, Ner'zhul. Over time the Orcs, with the exception of the Frostwolf clan and Orgrim Doomhammer, were corrupted and nearly wiped out the last of the Draenei. Over time, the corruption of the demons turned Draenor into a wasteland, and the Orcs built a portal to this world and made war upon the humans of Stormwind. The Orcs managed to push the humans north to their sister kingdom of Lordaeron. After a long war, the humans reclaimed Lordaeron and pushed the Orcs back through the portal. The new Orcish leader of the Warlocks, spellcasters who summons demons of the Burning Legion, Gul'dan opened multiple portals to different worlds, trying to receive aid. The force of the dimensional energies ripped the planet apart, sending the floating remains into the abyss of the twisting nether. It is now called Outland, and ruled by Illidan Stormrage. Thrall, son of Frostwolf clan chief Durotan, took over as warchief shortly after Draenor was destroyed, reviving the Orcs' shamanic roots. A prophet greeted him after he had liberated the Orcs from the internment camps. He was instructed to head west to Kalimdor, the Forgotten Lands. He mustered his troops and obeyed orders. In the Darkspear Jungle Troll clan, he gained some allies. At the same time, Arthas, the paladin and prince of Lordaeron, was looking into a plague that was plaguing his people. He found that it was transforming people into the Lich King's undead minions and spreading through the grain they were eating. North to the roof of the world Northrend, Arthas met and pursued the dreadlord Mal'Donis. Mal'Donis was slain by him using the runeblade Frostmourne. Arthas serves as an illustration of what might occur if retaliation consumes you. Frostmourne destroyed his father's kingdom after stealing his soul. Unshed tears began to well up in Linthian's eyes as he paused and took a trembling breath. It was obvious that the next part was a painful memory. He then advanced on the kingdom of the High Elves, Quel'Thalas. He almost destroyed their whole race. In the mystical Sunwell, a pool that was all that was left of the Well of Eternity when the Night Elves switched to Druid arts thousands of years ago, he carried the remains of the necromancer Kel'Thuzad to the source of the High Elves' power. He brought Kel'Thuzad back to this world as a lich by using the energy of the Sunwell. My little sister is Sylvanas, the Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, a group of undead that have escaped the Lich King's control. I was there when Arthas almost wiped out my entire race, when his undead minions tore my wife and child to pieces, and when that bastard killed my sister and turned her into a banshee. I am somewhat relieved that I can now communicate with her in the Forsaken Royal Quarter. Anyway, in order to meet Thrall and his new allies, the Taruan, the Burning Legion and the human sorceress Jaina Proudmoore traveled to Kalimdor. The Night Elf leaders Tyrad, Malfurion, Jaina, and Thrall united against the Burning Legion and succeeded in expelling Archimonde, the general who had arrived on this planet. However, the Night Elves gave up their immortality in the process. With the help of the Naga, Night Elves destroyed in the explosion of the Well of Eternity, Illidan Stormrage, brother of Malfurion Stormrage, managed to escape his underground prison and flee to a group of islands in order to retrieve an object known as the Eye of Sargeras. He eventually made his way to Icecrown, the home of the Lich King in Northrend, where he was vanquished by the Death Knight Arthas, the same one who destroyed my people, who rose to become the Lich King. Outland and Illidan's stronghold were accessible through the Dark Portal a few months ago. In remembrance of our departed kin, my people have renamed themselves Blood Elves instead of High Elves, Linthian concluded. As Linthian wiped away a few tears from the agonizing memories, Naruto and Sarutobi gazed out at the midday sun. All right, enough of the depressing memories. How about we grab a bite to eat? Linthian inquired. Well, how about some ramen? Calmly, Naruto asked. I'm not sure, but I have definitely had it. I'm always willing to try new foods, Linthian replied. Before being struck over the head by a staff, Naruto yelled with delight. Naruto, we need to work on your loudness. From now on, you will be punished every time you yell in that manner, with the severity of the punishment getting worse each time. I'm going to let it go for now. Sarutobi shook his head in amusement, and Naruto swallowed a little, wondering what his punishment would be, and mentally deciding to keep his noise down. After they arrived at Ichiraku Ramen, Linthian surveyed the menu thoughtfully while the other two placed their orders. Then he sighed, reached into his pack, took out a wrapped package, and gestured the owner's daughter over and asked, grinning broadly, "Could you possibly add this kind of meat to my order?" She said, "Oh, of course, Ambassador San," and then she carried it to the back to have her father get the orders ready. What did you give Linthian Sensei to her? Naruto inquired. Kodo meat. When we go to Mulgore, you will actually see both wild and domesticated Kodos. Those Tauren who come to support Konoha's economy might also ride Kodo. The Tauren hunt wild Kodo for meat, clothing, tents, and a variety of other items, and they use the domesticated Kodo as mounts. The warrior city of Orgrimmar is shared by trolls and orcs. Beneath the remains of the former capital city of Lordaeron, the Forsaken have constructed an underground labyrinth. There is an orb of translocation that will transport us to my native Silvermoon. As Naruto's 20 bowls and his and Sarutobi's single bowls arrived, Linthian declared, "We will depart early tomorrow." As soon as Linthian saw how many bowls Naruto had, he said, "I am not paying for that much." The following day, Linthian met his pupil on his big bird at the North Gate, and before they could be seen in Konoha for another year, he took Naruto by the wrist in a clasp and swung him up in front of him on his bird. What will I learn first, Linthian Sensei? As he adjusted to the strange bird they were riding's movements, Naruto asked. We must first determine the type of magic you prefer. The only people in the world who use chakra are ninjas, which makes them special. The rest of the world uses simple energy, rage accumulated through battle, or a force known as mana. Mana is used by hunters, druids, paladins, warlocks, priests, shamans, and mages like me. Some of us, such as mages, warlocks, and priests, would hardly be able to survive in the world without mana, myself less so because I have also spent a lot of time learning melee combat. Hunters and paladins use mana, hunters more so than paladins. Warriors use their battle accumulated rage to perform combat maneuvers that, with a few blows, could almost eliminate all but the most formidable opponents. Rouges use a unique form of energy that I do not even pretend to understand how they harness it. I am not proud of what my people have done in the past, calling them demons, but I have discovered that if you have a strong enough will, you can resist the temptation of magic. This is something you must always remember before you learn your first spell. The magic I will teach you is very addictive. The Naga and my people as a race are addicted to magic. Since the Sunwell's power can no longer satisfy our hunger, some blood elves have succumbed to their addiction and are now merely animals motivated solely by their addiction's hunger. Some of your first tests will be against them. As you progress, you will inevitably choose spells from one of the 3 branches of combat magic, but initially I will teach you one from each of the 2 main branches. The 3 types of magic used in combat are fire, arcane, and frost. Personally, I prefer a mix of fire and frost with a small amount of arcane. Frost Armor is the first frost spell I'll teach you. Firebolt is the name of the first fire. Until you gain some more practice with magic and stop automatically reverting to chakra, I will refrain from casting arcane spells. Alright Linthian Sensei. After the 2 rode for a few hours, they stopped next to a stream and Linthian pulled a collapsible fishing pole from his pack and easily caught a few fish. He then directed Naruto in how to pick good wood for a fire and how to cook caught fish. Sensei, how do you know so much about surviving in the wilds? Naruto asked his mentor as they were eating their fish. Once we were out of sight of the gate, I had noticed that you didn't follow the path, but you didn't appear the least bit unsure or disoriented. It comes from spending time in the wilds, Linthian said, grinning at his pupil before ruffling the boy's hair. You either learn or die. I tended to stay on the roads for a while in the beginning of my career, but as I gained confidence in my skills and abilities, I started to stray farther and farther from the road until I felt more at ease in the outdoors than on the roads. I know far more about wilderness survival than the typical mage, or particularly warlock, but I don't know nearly as much as, say, a hunter. A year after Uzumaki Naruto and the ambassador to the Horde had departed, the people of Konoha had grown accustomed to the Horde races and were also in awe of their skills. Some younger members even began studying their arts instead of shinobi. At this point, however, two individuals in mage robes appeared at the north gate, each on a mount. One was mounted on a hawkstrider, the mount most frequently used by the Blood Elves, and the other was mounted on a skeletal horse, the mount most frequently used by the undead Forsaken. The amusing thing about the person on the undead horse was that he was clearly a human. Is it good to see you again, apprentice? On his hawkstrider, the Blood Elf posed the question. It is good, master. Should we check to see if I'm recognized by the Hokage? The young man answered. The other person with him had blonde hair that seemed to follow no order in the way it was spiked, and his blue eyes seemed to have an almost icy glow to them. The Blood Elf grinned before the two of them entered the village and made their way to the Hokage Tower. The Blood Elf's hair spiked backwards, red at the base and turning lighter to blonde as it went further back. The sight of the numerous Horde races interacting with the Konoha residents as they were walking through the village made both riders smile. They looked at one another, and the undead horseman said to his companion, "It's good to see people getting along with each other so unlike them, isn't it, Master Linthian?" "It's my apprentice, yes. I believe it's time for you to rejoin the ninja ranks. If you want, you can still learn from me every day following team building activities," the Blood Elf rider retorted. "That's what I personally want. I personally prefer magic over chakra, and the technique you teach me helps me avoid becoming addicted to it." After arriving at the Hokage Tower, the two dismounted and went inside, where Linthian once more turned the Hokage's documents to ash and the apprentice grinned as they entered the Hokage's office. When Sarutobi froze in mid-air, he realized that only one person ever burned his documents, even when he didn't want them to. His head snapped up to reveal two smirking figures in mage robes. One was a Blood Elf who had served as ambassador a year prior, and the other he didn't recognize, though he vaguely noticed the sun-kissed blonde hair and three faint lines on each cheek. As he connected the dots, his eyes grew wide. "Naruto?" "Yes, old man. I've returned," the blonde mage grinned as she spoke. Sarutobi smirked and then shook his head. Only Naruto had ever referred to him as an old man. Fortunately, the Genin graduation exam had taken place earlier in the week, giving him a week to organize his team. He had been hoping Naruto would arrive in time. "I take it you want to be a Genin, is that right, Naruto?" Sarutobi inquired. "Yes, I do. But after team building activities, I would still like to learn from Master Linthian," Naruto remarked, his eyes appearing to lighten bluer. "Very well," said Sarutobi, a little frightened by the cold gleam in Naruto's eyes. "On Friday, you will report to Ruka's classroom to pick up your Genin team. If I were to test you to determine your skill level, would that be okay with you?" "Yes, in fact, I would. A skilled shinobi never demonstrates his skills in advance, right?" Naruto asked, grinning broadly. Naruto's declaration caused Sarutobi to laugh aloud. "With you near Naruto, life is never boring. All right, I won't ask you to demonstrate your skills. Since I've heard that mounts aren't frequently sold to people below Anbu level, I must admit that I'm interested in how you obtained one. I don't mean to offend, but I don't think you're that strong already," Sarutobi said after controlling his laughter. "Being apprenticed to the Forsaken leader's older brother is beneficial. In addition to giving me a necklace that was a gift from her sister Illyria when she was still living, Sylvana's is genuinely pretty cool. I stole it from the corpse of a wraith that lived in the Ghostlands, where she had once lived. I now consider her to be somewhat of an aunt." "All right, enough looking back. That can wait until later. Your favorite ramen shop must be missing you." As Linthian moaned, Naruto's eyes brightened. It seemed that Linthian had been compelled to cover all of Naruto's food expenses, despite the fact that, based on what he had heard from other mages who had gone through it, it was common to be able to conjure food. However, given Naruto, it would seem that you would need an endless supply of power to feed him, if the food was ramen, that is. A few days later, Naruto was riding towards the academy on his undead horse with a slight smile. He wondered what his team would consist of. He was mostly a ranged heavy damage dealer, but sucked at close combat to put it bluntly. So there needed to be at least one taijutsu user on his team, and possibly a healer or genjutsu user. That would round off the team, if they were to go by skills and not grades, in that he would be stuck with the two best students in the physical and mental areas. Oh well, he'd make do with what he could. It wouldn't be good for his future comrades to be afraid of him before they had a chance to fight alongside him, so Naruto jumped off his undead ride as he reached the edge of the academy grounds and put him back in his crystal. He entered the academy grinning and waited outside Iruka's classroom until he heard the words, "An old classmate of yours has returned from a year-long training trip and will be joining the shinobi ranks as a genin with the rest of you." Naruto opened the door and entered after Iruka said that, then he sat down in the closest vacant seat. After the muttering subsided, because no one recognized him, Iruka proceeded to announce the genin teams. Uzumaki Naruto, Hyuga Hinata, and Uchiha Sasuke make up Team 1, Team 7. It's Hitaki Kakashi, your Junin sensei. Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura, and Inzuka Kiba make up Team 8. Yuhi Kurenai is your Junin sensei. There are still copies of Team 9 in use. Yanamaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akamichi Choji make up Team 10. Sarutobi Asuma is your Junin sensei. After an hour, your senseis will come get you for lunch. The Uchiha bloodline did not copy jutsu. Its user could instantly get a jutsu in a friendly spar from an opponent who worked their butt off to learn it. The Sharingan was nothing more than a cheap copycat's tool. Naruto looked around and saw his male teammate right away and suppressed a chuckle. He had not changed, and once Sasuke realized that he couldn't steal them, he would undoubtedly demand that Naruto teach him his own mage skills. Negative thoughts would make it easier for him to be corrupted by the magic he used, so Naruto shook himself from them and used his thoughts to try to find his other teammate. He was shocked to see her because she was much more self-assured and wearing shaman clothing. He had no idea that humans could become shamans, but how had she received the training, and if he knew his master, he was willing to wager that Linthian had something to do with it. Naruto.kun. He was asked by Hinata, who spoke directly next to him. Yes, Hinata? I apologize for the lack of an honorific, but I've been in places where they don't use them for so long that I've fallen into the habit of leaving them out, Naruto said after asking and slapping the back of his head. It's all right, Naruto.kun. I wanted to know where you've been for the past year, but if I understand correctly, the ambassador who arrived a year ago trained you. You are right. In addition to the greatest prankster to have ever lived in Quel'Thalas, I was trained by the best mage the Blood Elves possess. I take it that you were also trained by another faction of the Horde? Yes, a female orc shaman named Droga came about a week or two after you left and began to train me in the ways of the spirits, Hinata said with a smile. I think I would be the cure for the group. Naruto remarked, makes sense. Well, might as well get something to eat, before taking out a few rather large spider legs from his pouch and loudly crunching into them. I didn't know you liked spider, Hinata remarked, shedding a tear. After doing some spider killing, I found it in the Ghostlands. It turns out that Ghostland spider legs are amazing when properly fixed. Want some? If not, I have a wolf or a boar. I think I'll try the boar. After giving a nod, Naruto reached into his pack and took out a crystal that looked like the one that held his mount. A cloud of smoke revealed a set of ribs that were smoking a little and emitting a delicious aroma, which attracted their final teammate because it smelled much better than anything he ever cooked. Hey Sasuke, I take it you want to try some of my food? Lord Aaron's blood elves are definitely skilled at showing a man how to do some pretty amazing things. After saying, I have some wolf meat here too, Naruto removed another crystal, prepared a plate of steaming steaks, and gave it to Sasuke. After performing some hand seals that neither of them had ever seen before, 3 vials of water materialized in front of them. Naruto picked one up right away and began to drink before realizing his teammates were staring at him. One of the skills I picked up was creating food and drink out of thin air, though I am really good at creating water, the food I create is crap. However, we should be fine for a number of missions to come because I have spent so much time preparing meals and keeping them in subspace. Also, almost everything I own is now kept in subspace, Naruto said coolly. What is subspace? Sasuke asked, looking perplexed. When things are sealed or kept in crystals, they go there. Subspace maintains suspended animation so that everything is produced in precisely the same way. Very helpful for monitoring inmates or obtaining evidence of an assassination. Both of Naruto's teammates paled at how calmly he was talking about assassinations. What had he been through? Naruto eventually had enough after a few hours. That's it, it's time to repay, he yelled. Naruto grabbed a chalkboard eraser from the board in front of the classroom and wedged it at the top of the door so it would fall if the door was opened, causing his teammates to raise their eyebrows. He then muttered under his breath, causing a streak of blue to shoot from his hand into the eraser. which briefly glowed blue before returning to normal. If our master allows that eraser to hit him, it will be a terrifying surprise, Naruto smirked. 5 minutes or so later, the door opened and a haired man with a mask over his lower face and a headband over his left eye protruded into the classroom, with an enchanted eraser landing right on top of his head. Apart from the intense shivering, it appeared to everyone else that the man had just frozen in place, but to the person who had the eraser dropped on him, it felt as though his insides were frozen solid. Shitface, that's what you get for being 3 hours late. Naruto grinned and remarked, one of the best mages in the horde taught me. With less stuttering as he warmed up, the newcomer said, M.eat.m.meo. On the roof in 5 minutes. Naruto smirked again before walking out of the room and up to the roof, flanked by his teammates. Once the group of 3 arrived at the agreed-upon designation, they sat in a semicircle around their supposed instructor. Alright, let's have introductions, shall we? Even though his face was still a little blue, their sensei calmly said, you go first, Blondie. Alright, then. Uzumaki. Windrunner Naruto is my name. I like ramen, cooked spider legs, Sylvanas, and training. I don't like queers, the Alliance, the jerk Lich King Arthas, and pretty much anyone who irritates me. My dream is to kill Arthas and become the world's greatest mage, Naruto stated coolly. At that, Kakashi arched an eyebrow. Hino no longer yelled that he would be Hokage, and the Kyuubi container appeared to be very different from who he was a year ago. Broody. Uchiha Sasuke is my name. I have more dislikes than likes. My goal is to murder a specific man. White Eye. Hyuga Hinata is my name. I enjoy flower pressing, the elemental spirits, my younger sister Hanabi, and my sensei Droga. I detest haughty bastards, those who judge others without knowing them, and those who disrespect the environment. Rebuilding the Hyuga clan is my dream. Alright, you are all different. For the actual Genin test, how about we get together on Training Field 70 tomorrow at 8 o'clock? You'll just throw up if you eat breakfast. Naruto snorted, got up, nodded to both teammates, and left for his former apartment as the sensei of Team 7 vanished in a cloud of smoke. When the other 2 members of his team arrived at Training Field 70 at 8 the following morning, Naruto was waiting there looking through a thick book. He nodded and looked up as he took out 2 muffins and threw one to each of his teammates. Remember that we were instructed not to eat breakfast? As Hinata bit into her muffin, Sasuke inquired. As a starving person, do you really think you can defeat a Junin? Naruto inquired. After Sasuke gave a small nod and nibbled on his own muffin, the group waited, and waited, and waited, and waited. When Kakashi arrived 3 hours later, he had to immediately avoid lightning, fire, and ice bolts. His genin were furious and nothing would stop them from exacting revenge. While Hinata conjured a totem that slowed Kakashi down, Sasuke flashed through some hand seals and launched several tiny fireballs at Kakashi, and Naruto charged up a frostbolt spell in his cupped palms. When the frostbolt spell that Naruto launched struck him in the side, Kakashi's eyes widened as his reflexes slowed even more than they had already, and he felt compelled to lift his headband to reveal his lone Sharingan eye. Kakashi began to perspire, either because they were faster than he had expected or because he was moving more slowly. The sight that met his eyes was unlike anything he had ever seen, and the Sharingan worked by finding the chakra in a person's body and observing how it flowed. Every technique that was known to exist, whether it was ninjutsu, genjutsu, or even taijutsu, required chakra in some way. Ninjutsu and genjutsu used chakra to power themselves, while taijutsu used chakra to make the body faster and stronger. Consciously or not, by observing the movement of the chakra in a person's body, the Sharingan was able to predict and replicate the person's thoughts, and then copied whatever technique the person was about to use. All of that was fine and dandy, but only one of his students was using chakra. Sasuke was employing techniques he had seen and imitated, while Naruto and Hinata's chakra was just expressing their movements with no indication of the techniques at play. The spell was a favorite of the mages of Dalaran and the Alliance when the Scourge first took control of Lordaeron, and Naruto grinned as he prepared one of the more recent spells he had learned. It worked by covering a target in mana, and then the mana would sink into the target's body, changing the body it was in into a harmless form. Although a lot happens, the spell is almost instantaneous, and the default form for the spell was a sheep, though a skilled mage could theoretically transform a target into any form. Naruto still preferred the sheep form for the polymorph spell. The 3 genin towered over the polymorphed Kakashi with a sadistic gleam in their eyes, and to everyone's surprise, apart from Naruto's, he was suddenly in midair, covered in white wool, and had 4 legs. Sheep. Kakashi baed and kicked his feet before he fell to the ground. After 30 minutes, The three had stuffed their polymorph sensei into a sack and taken him into the forest where they wouldn't be disturbed and tortured him in various ways, with Naruto tying his feet onto a spit and slowly turning him over a bonfire that Sasuke was gracious enough to provide, and Naruto laughed as sheep. Kakashi narrowly avoided another fireball. During her training under Droga, Hinata apparently developed a sadistic side, letting Kakashi loose and zapping him with lightning bolts before healing him and doing it again. Oh, and she also beat him with a big hammer that at least one woman in every manga seemed to own, and she enchanted it with a spell called Flametongue Weapon, which should go without saying. In addition to kunai and other sharp, pointy objects, Sasuke was now throwing fireballs. Naruto scowled and checked his watch when he noticed that the spell would expire in 3, 2, 1. Normally I would have given you a test with 2 bells and told you that whoever got a bell passed, said Kakashi, taking deep breaths as the smoke cleared to reveal a furious Kakashi holding several of the kunai and shuriken that Sasuke had been throwing. The goal of that test would be teamwork rather than receiving a bell. You 3 have already demonstrated cooperation. Therefore, you all pass in spite of what you did to me while I was under whatever jutsu that was. For your first mission, meet me tomorrow at the same training grounds. That cat is going to die. The cat yelled as a shard of ice pierced its thigh, causing it to crash into a tree trunk and knock itself out, and it began to run as blasts of fire and ice began to blast where it had been a moment earlier. A tall, 12-year-old boy with icy blue eyes and blonde hair, wearing dark blue flowing robes with arcane symbols on them, carried a staff in his left hand. The staff was made of a wood that was not native to the Konoha area, and it twisted about a foot from the top up to form 3 claws, for want of a better term, that held a dark onyx stone in place. Then again, that works too, said the voice that was just before yelling death threats towards the feline creature as he emerged from the underbrush. Unlike her teammate, who had dark hair and the lavender pupil, less eyes of the Hyuga clan, the blonde walked up in chainmail with an axe on her hip and a shield on her back, asking, "Are you sure? We could still kill it and say that we found it too late to save it, but did kill the beast that did?" The final teammate, who had black eyes, hair that resembled a duck perched on his head, khaki shorts, and a blue shirt bearing the fan symbol of the nearly extinct Uchiha clan, said, "I agree," as he left. "Well done, team," on locating the target, the last member of Team 7 exclaimed, forcing the other members to temporarily put their murderous ideas aside. After a few minutes, the cat was given back to the daimyo's wife, who was suffocating it at the time. All 3 of Team 7's genin thought, serves it right, they were obviously not very fond of the cat. When the Hokage pulled out a set of folders labeled D. Rank, with Team 7 at mission reception a few minutes later, the folders were reduced to ashes, and when Sarutobi looked up, he saw a furious Naruto breathing heavily, surrounded by flames, and with a huge tick in his forehead. No more. F#ing. Rank, D goals. While Sarutobi was hiding under the metaphorical bed on the inside of his head, Naruto yelled as his mana responded to his rage and the windows behind the Hokage blew out. At the very least, give us a C rank. With a menacing twinkle in his eye, Naruto threatened, "I can do to you what we did to Kakashi during the bell test." Crunch. Wham. Sarutobi barely suppressed a whimper as he saw the female orc, dressed in leather and hide armor, walk over the splinters of the old door with a large battle axe strapped to her back. That Orses was even more insane than Anko, but he wasn't scared enough to miss Naruto's smile when he saw her. "Oh, Nar-thos. Make me do something," the female orc yelled as Naruto was clearly holding back his laughter. "What makes Naruto so hilarious?" Kakashi asked, utterly disregarding the Orses at his side. When he collapsed to the ground, gasping with laughter, Naruto said, "Nar-thos means, no sack." The Orses looked rather amused, Sasuke smirked, Hinata began to giggle, Kakashi turned the next page of his book, and all the other humans in the room blinked before the phrase translated itself in their minds. "Now Surgra, began Sarutobi. The Orses, who was identified as Surgra, said, "Just shut up and give me a mission. Nether, 1, I'll even take a C rank if it's with the blonde Zanbauer, 2, here," as Naruto yelled in desperation. "Well, 1 C rank is up for grabs. It's an escort mission, all right." "Good, now hurry up and tell us who we'll be escorting." "Tazuna.san must be kept safe until the bridge he is constructing is finished. You can enter right now." An elderly man who smelled of alcohol and was carrying a half-empty sake bottle staggered in through a different door than the one Surgra had smashed, saying, "These are the runts supposed to be protecting me." At the first hint of a bird, they appear to have wet themselves. Particularly the one wearing a bathrobe. While Surgra pulled her axe off her back, just in case, and everyone in the room winced as the temperature dropped. Naruto's head slowly turned towards their client as one of his hands began to glow a light blue. Naruto spun like he was pitching a baseball and threw a bolt of ice at the man's sake bottle, freezing it completely. Tazuna dropped the bottle in surprise, and it shattered completely when it hit the ground. Surgra remarked, "Never insult him if you want to live a long life, human," before she and a composed Naruto went off to pack. "What is the duration of your stay in Konoha?" As he and Surgra walked out of the mission reception office, Naruto asked. "Oh, I was transferred from the Crossroads approximately a month prior to your return. It took some time for me to get used to seeing only forest instead of desert, but I eventually got used to it. This is how I've been told Drainer used to look." Surgra answered, "I wish I could have seen it. Although I haven't visited Outland myself, Master Linthian has informed me that it doesn't look anything like it used to. Have you recently heard from Orgrimmar?" A few weeks ago, some of Lord Thrall's agents reportedly spotted some humans wearing black cloaks with red clouds. However, those are the most intriguing recent developments. I'm going to have to go to Orgrimmar sometime in the near future. I haven't been there since the second month of my training. What? 6 months into your journey, you departed from the Barrens. We didn't stop on the way to the Goblin Zeppelin because we were rushing to get to Tirisfal Glades. Those little buggers are not someone I will ever trust. Well, it demonstrates your intelligence. That, along with almost everything they create, will eventually blow up, so don't trust them to be anything other than their avaricious lil selves. You are in that exact spot. Before rushing to his apartment, Naruto remarked, "Well, I'll see you at the gate." After 5 minutes, Naruto whistled as he packed, which is another way of saying that he sealed everything he owned into crystals and placed them in different sacks. He then swung his backpack onto his back and headed for the north gate, where he saw Surgra sharpening her axe with a whetstone. Surgra grinned as she saw Naruto coming to the gate. She had interacted with him in the Barrens and initially thought he would be a conceited snob like most people, but after he opened his mouth, she still didn't like him because he was a human and constantly boasting about being Hokage. However, after a few months, he matured and changed into a person she could respect, and they became friends. She didn't realize she was starting to like the little brat until he had left, which is why she had offered to be moved to Konoha. Even though this was only a C rank, it was still entirely possible for members of the Alliance to try to sabotage relations between Konoha and the Horde by eliminating the only shinobi team that possessed any kind of abilities that the Horde taught. So Surgra shook herself out of her thoughts as the rest of the group arrived and they set out towards Wave Country. She would need to always be on guard when there were so few allies around, as there had been rumors that the Alliance had allied with enemies of Konoha. When she saw 2 water puddles and crinkled her nose up when she smelled a human who hadn't taken a bath in weeks inside the puddle, she looked up to see that there were no clouds in the sky and that it had been dry for more than a week, but she couldn't think about that right now because she needed to focus her eyes and mind on her mission. With a quick glance at Naruto, who had noticed and was preparing the seals for his polymorph spell, she nodded slightly and removed her axe from her back, slamming it into the other puddle, which was now directly in front of her. His eyes darted to one of the puddles, signaling that he wanted that one. "How are you acting?" Before the illusion failed and Surgra had to remove her axe from a Mist Nin's skull after it had cut almost clean through, Tazuna yelled because he was just in front of the puddle and believed she was attempting to kill him. Before a sack was tossed over it and Team 7 wandered off into the forest, a cloud of smoke appeared as a second puddle transformed into a sheep that BAAED in surprise. When Surgra noticed Kakashi shivering, she blinked and asked, "Diofna.ar. 3. Why did you shiver?" she inquired. Kakashi only said, "Let's just say that I know how that Mist Nin is going to feel," before 3 teenagers began to laugh hysterically as they tormented a helpless animal. Happy Team 7, people. After a half hour or so, the 3 came back, and Hinata gave Tazuna a fierce look before hurling lightning at his feet, which caused him to perform a humorous dance. "You were the target of those 2, 4, Gato hired Missing Nin to kill you because you are constructing a bridge that will deprive him of Wave Country. Regretfully, there are Scourge members collaborating with them as well," Naruto said after pausing briefly. This mission is getting more interesting by the minute, Surgra thought, her eyes widening, then narrowing, and then growling. So the rumors were true. The Scourge was here? She thought, her face breaking into a big smile. A few days later, Team 7 and 2 other people were on a boat heading into Wave itself. Naruto was looking at the enormous bridge with an impressed expression on his face, and Surgra let out a low whistle when he saw how big the bridge was. Whatever you think of Tazuna, he was undoubtedly a damned good builder. After they landed, Surgra unhooked her axe and began sniffing the air. She looked around, realizing that there were too many hiding places and that Alliance members could be anywhere, especially if they were Rouges. She heard a whistling in the air, which made her ears perk up, and then her eyes widened, causing her to hit the deck at the same moment as Tazuna and the rest of Team 7. She felt a huge sword pass over her, and she looked up just in time to see a man, a shinobi based on his sandals and headband, land on a tree before idly turning back to face the group. A voice said, "So these are the shinobi that allied with the horde," as a man in black robes emerged from the trees. The first man said, "It's no surprise the Demon Brothers failed, Sharingan Kakashi. And I must admit, the Orses Surgra, that it is an honor for me to take on such a well-known warrior." Before a skeleton pulled itself from the ground and symbols were drawn on it, the blatant necromancer declared, "My name is Mandrild Hathborn." Then Surgra snarled, "Leave the scourge. Scum to me, I'll handle him." His skeleton ran between them and blocked with a sword as Zabuza and Kakashi began playing a deadly game of tag with water clones, and the necromancer grinned as Surgra charged at him and swung her two-handed axe. While the rest of the Konoha group fought, Naruto, Hinata, and Sasuke formed up around Tazuna. Hinata summoned multiple totems and used the Flametongue weapon spell to enchant her axe. Sasuke pulled out a kunai and slipped into a stance that allowed him to easily block and throw. And Naruto layered himself in magical defenses, his eyes widening as he cast the spell Arcane Intellect upon himself. "Take the necromancer alive, Surgra." When Naruto realized what was happening, he yelled. "You got it, brat," Surgra responded with a shout. Sasuke remarked, "Looks like Kakashi Sensei could use some help," while the other two Team 7 members looked around. After quickly analyzing the technique and concluding that Zabuza couldn't move because he hadn't already, Naruto slapped his forehead when he saw Kakashi trapped in a sphere of water by Zabuza. He looked at his teammates before realizing something. Hinata was a shaman.in training, and since shamans worked with the elements, perhaps. "Hey Hinata, could you speak to Zabuza's water and request that it release Master Kakashi?" As his female teammate's eyes brightened, Naruto asked. "It might take a few minutes, but I'll try." After saying, "Keep any water clones off me while I'm doing this," Hinata sat down cross-legged. After giving Sasuke a quick glance, Naruto muttered, "Do you think you can keep the clones away from me? I'm not skilled in close quarters combat." "I think so, just be ready to have a backup plan in case some get through," Sasuke responded. Everyone watching was taken aback by the reaction when Naruto nodded and threw a frostbolt at a single water clone. Naruto didn't know many spells overall, and the majority of them were frost spells, but apparently water clones and frost spells don't mix well. The water clone completely froze before breaking when Naruto's frostbolt spell struck it, and he got a sadistic, evil grin on his face while Zabuza began to perspire. After hurling frost spells at Zabuza's clones in the original, Naruto snarled and began to charge up his most potent spell, mentally deciding that Hinata could heal Kakashi later, after observing that Zabuza was able to block all of his spells with his sword, which was larger than any weapon should be. "Don't take this personally, Kakashi. Since I'm still learning how to use this spell, I hope it's okay if I use you to help teach Hinata how to heal Blizzard." As he released the accumulated magical power, Naruto yelled. Zabuza grinned as nothing occurred and then remarked, "Looks like that jutsu of yours didn't work, Gaki." Naruto just pointed up. Zabuza looked up, confused, and saw a lot of ice shards falling at him. Then he turned back to Naruto and glared, "I hate you." Then, in a move that effectively freed Kakashi from the frozen rain of death, Zabuza dove under to hide from Naruto's hardly controlled spell. The spell appeared to have worn off as Naruto collapsed onto one knee, panting, and reached into a pocket to retrieve 2 vials of blue liquid, which he quickly chugged down. Meanwhile, Naruto was perspiring as he struggled to control the magical power and began to tear it apart from the inside after realizing that he would lose control if it didn't end soon. While Surgra was carrying the necromancer over one shoulder, Kakashi had Zabuza pinned to a tree by the time the potions took effect. As Kakashi was about to finish Zabuza, 2 thin needles punctured Zabuza's neck, and after feeling for a pulse, Kakashi verified that the Demon of the Mist was dead. The younger members of the Konoha group gathered around Tazuna and started talking about a variety of topics while the older members were chatting with Zabuza's killer. "Hey Sasuke, did you lose the foot long kunai up your ass after I left?" Naruto inquired. "I came across one of the Forsaken not long after the horde began arriving in Konoha. He instilled humility in me after I initially treated him like a piece of dirt. To get an advantage over my fangirls, I chose to wear my brooding mask in public," Sasuke said, causing Tazuna and the rest of Team 7 to shudder. Hinata muttered, "Well, let's find out what the scoop is with Kakashi Sensei and Surgra.san," as the aforementioned individuals approached the genin and client. "So, why did you want me to kill the necromancer, Zanbauer?" As she approached, Surgra inquired. Remember the last time the Scourge had necromancers in an area that was completely unprepared? Calmly, Naruto asked her. Surgra pondered for just a second before going completely white. What? When was the last time? Sasuke inquired, obviously perplexed. The last time the Scourge came to a place where they had no foothold was when they released the plague, replied Naruto. The plague? It probably wasn't anything good if it had to do with necromancers, Tazuna said. The plague, indeed. Grain was contaminated by the plague, which made everyone who consumed it into the Lich King's mindless undead servants. The Runeblade Frostmourne took the soul of the Prince of Lordaeron after he traveled to Northrend, the roof of the world, to exact revenge on the Dreadlord who was then in charge of the Scourge. In the end, he merged with Ner'zhul, the Lich King, and the two became the new Lich King. The land of Lordaeron is reduced to a wasteland covered in undead due to an undeath plague. If the plague was spread by Grain, everyone who was unfamiliar with Lordaeron's recent past paled dramatically before turning to face the necromancer. We must now head to town. Before sprinting off in that direction, Tazuna yelled. Hold on, Tazuna! Naruto yelled. What? Before too many people consume contaminated grain, we must get to town. Naruto yelled, I know, there's a much quicker way, before slamming a purple crystal onto the ground from his pouch. The crystal landed on a skeletal horse, which was visible through a cloud of dramatic purple smoke. Surgra took out a black crystal and slammed it down to form a huge wolf, and Naruto jumped on the horse before yanking Tazuna into the spot behind him and taking off, with the older passenger giving directions. Surgra then turned to face the other passengers who were still there and pulled Hinata onto the spot in front of her. Aim to stay up. Before pursuing Naruto and Tazuna, Surgra snarled. After saying, I guess we'd better follow them, Kakashi swung Sasuke onto his back, pumped chakra into his legs, and ran after the four members on horseback. They arrived in town just in time to witness the arrival of the most recent grain shipment, but up at the front, Tazuna was struggling to keep up with the scenery enough to give Naruto the right directions. Tazuna got off Naruto's mount and ran towards the stand, but even he could see that he wouldn't reach it quickly enough before someone left with some. People flinched back as the grain quickly caught fire and turned into a blaze, but Naruto dismounted and began using frost spells to create a perimeter before using them to put out the fire itself. That is, until a ball of fire flew past him and struck the grain shipment squarely. As the flames subsided, Naruto gasped and saw that there were only a few grain stalks remaining. Glancing sideways, Naruto approached the stalks and picked one up before examining it. Naruto calmly said, Yup, this grain was infected all right, and then he got back up. Do not eat anything if you have stolen grain from this area. It was tainted with a fatal illness. As Kakashi and Surgra arrived with Sasuke and Hinata, respectively, Tazuna yelled. Surgra approached Naruto and declared, We need to destroy all of the grain that was a part of this shipment. We are unable to do so. The majority of goods are delivered directly to Gato's hiding place, and nobody is aware of its location, Tazuna said. Scourge spit. After muttering, Naruto realized that everyone was staring at him because of that remark. Forsaken curse, explained Naruto. Surgra said menacingly, Well, by the end of the week, Wave will be short several of those living. You do realize that if we cannot isolate the grain, we will have to destroy all of Wave, don't you? Naruto sighed before turning to Tazuna. Surgra, Team 7, and Tazuna then returned to Tazuna's house outside of town in a somber mood, all of them sad that some of the infected grain had escaped notice. Tazuna, looking like the elderly man he was, sighed wearily before responding, Yeah, but that doesn't mean I have to like it though. Even though I might lose everything I've ever cared about, I'm kind of glad I went to Konoha. How? If I didn't, then that necromancer would still be running around, and who knows how many people that grain we intercepted would have infected. Before entering Tazuna's house, everyone nodded at that reasoning. A pretty young woman wearing an apron approached them to say hello as she brushed a powder off her hands, and Naruto's eyes narrowed before he hurriedly demanded, What was that powder you just brushed off your hands? After a moment of shock, the young woman said, Just some grain, why? After rushing into the kitchen and inspecting the grain she had been crushing with a mortar and pestle, Naruto sighed and muttered a charm to himself before heading back to his group and declaring, The grain is safe. We apologize if we scared you, but we discovered some contaminated grain in town. An entire continent was wiped out in large part by the plague that the grain was infected with. As the woman began to panic, Tazuna reassured her, It's okay, Tsunami, we already destroyed the grain in town. However, does Gato not receive all of the grain first? If so, we might not need to worry about anything, Tsunami remarked, a smile beginning to appear on her face. We have serious concerns if all of his soldiers have consumed contaminated grain. Naruto clarified, those who consume that grain are not only killed, but are transformed into undead under the control of the Lich King Arthas Menethil. Hey, don't you think we ought to let Konoha know that the scourge is here? The necromancer remained on Surgra's shoulder as she asked. Kakashi remarked, good point, and then called forth a Nindog. Surgra wrote a note outlining the circumstances and tossed it to the dog, who barked before departing for Konoha. My estimate is that Zabuza won't be able to fight for a week. We'll use that time to train, Kakashi said with a smile. I don't mean to offend you, Sensei, but I want to try to locate the spirit of water this week. I've already established a connection with the spirits of fire and earth, and I can use them to make totems. I can make water totems if I can please the spirit of water, Hinata said. Naruto smirked as Kakashi shuddered in memory. And I should probably use this week to gain more control over some of my spells, like my blizzard spell, Naruto said. You're left with the Uchiha, I suppose. Surgra offered to guard Tazuna for the majority of the week before she and the other members of Team 7 went out back to question the necromancer. When someone knocked on Tazuna's door during breakfast 2 days later, Tsunami answered. Sir, may I assist you? Everyone heard her inquire. A raspy voice said, we're reinforcements, and Naruto grinned before running outside. Irodny! Naruto exclaimed with delight. A deeper voice said, hey calf, see you've grown since I last saw you, as Naruto hurried out the door. Surgra smiled and said, Windhorn, as she left as well. It's been a while, Surgra, girl. Before smacking noises could be heard, a voice with a thick accent began to ask, any chance o' me getting lucked? Voken, Hinata muttered, smiling amusedly and shaking her head. A third voice, which Sasuke and Hinata both vaguely recognized, said, okay, calm down. We were all that could be sent, but even if what you said is true, we should be enough. Master Lin. Inside, people heard Naruto exclaim with delight. When the most recent voice shouted, and what's this I hear about you using a spell you have not mastered yet? There were bonking noises. I taught you better than that, didn't I? You will have mastered that spelling by the end of this week, or else. What gives me the impression that we won't have enough food? Tazuna posed a rhetorical question. Don't worry, Naruto has a lot of exotic foods sealed away, and he and his master can both conjure food and water. Hinata smiled and said, we'll be alright. Naruto opened several racks of boar ribs, large drumsticks from different breeds of striders, large flightless birds, and a set of spider legs, which greatly agitated Tazuna, Tsunami, and Inari. Tazuna's grandson, Linthian, then summoned several vials of water and opened a case of ale for Tazuna and others who actually had an alcohol tolerance, as even a single sip of highly distilled sake made Linthian faint, much to his friend's amusement. Why do you try so hard? Inari yelled, slamming his hands on the table 5 minutes after the horde members arrived. Gato cannot be resisted. Anyone who does so will perish. Voken jumped out of his chair at this, laughing so hard he was having trouble breathing, and Irodny simply laughed beneath the cloak that concealed his undeadness, while Windhorn and Linthian merely arched their eyebrows. Kid, we battled demons that would turn anything you could imagine into worms. Voken said, laughing uncontrollably at every pause. The only way a human could be against us would be if he performed that same things. The troll is correct, as much as I hate to say it. Even if he contracts the plague, like my family did, there is no way that a fat businessman would oppose us, Irodny said. You believe you are an expert? You're not from the elemental countries, and you don't even reside here. You have no idea what suffering is like. Naruto winced visibly as he looked at his master in response to Inari's shout. For his part, Linthian was only expressing his rage by shaking his glass in his hand, until the glass broke and he turned his glowing green eyes to the child, who had just realized that he had made a grave error. I have no idea what suffering is like. Are you aware of the fate of my people? Do you? Linthian yelled as magic erupted all around him. After Inari gave a terrified shake of his head, Linthian went on. My homeland was invaded 5 years ago by a madman leading an undead army. The Ranger, General of Silvermoon, my sister Sylvanus Windrunner, was always trying to stop Arthas Menethil, the former prince of Lordaeron, who was the bastard in charge of the army. When she finally failed, I had to watch from a distance as he struck her with his sword. I watched as he let her slide off after dangling her from his sword. Then I had to see him not even give her a peaceful death. She became a banshee because of the bastard. After that, I had to witness an undead invasion of my house. What happened then, do you know? N.No, Inari said in a whisper. I had to witness my wife and son being taken and eaten alive. I don't know about suffering, little brat, so don't you dare tell me. Your family still loves you enough to put everything on the line for you. Your grandfather is putting his life in danger to support this nation. And you simply wallowing in your misery in the past, not even acknowledging that. I don't know who you lost, but I can assure you that it is nothing compared to witnessing your people driven to the brink of extinction. I would have died long ago if I had done that. Only about 500 blood elves remain in the world. And the thirst that afflicts all of my people is driving the person who is meant to lead us insane. What are you saying? Tizuna inquired. The only people in the world who use chakra are shinobi. Other people use a force known as arcane magic. My race is addicted to magic, and that type of magic is extremely addictive. We relied on the Sunwell's mystical energies for several thousand years, but after they were destroyed, we had to find other ways to generate energy. I've only ever drained magic from manarates, which are creatures made entirely of magic, and objects that have magic in them. Other things aren't as particular. Some blood elves have started calling forth demons and then removing their magic. To satisfy their hunger, some have turned to hunting mages and other spellcasters. Before ripping a piece of meat from a drumstick, Sergra remarked. But others have become so insane by their hunger that they are ruled by it, little more than animals that feed on magic. There is always someone who has suffered more than you. Try to remember that little calf, Windhorn said, putting a gentle hand on Inari's shoulder. Look at me. The same plague that Gato now has in his grain that he has stashed away destroyed my entire nation. Ierdni said, take a good look at what it does, and then he reached up and threw back his hood, exposing his partially rotted face. Inari looked horrified as Tsunami screamed and Tizuna fell back in his chair. Slow down. A whole country of undead people have broken free from the Lich King's mental hold. Naruto calmly said, my pseudo aunt is one of them, as he removed and examined Sylvanus' necklace. I didn't know the Dark Lady gave you that, Ierdni said, jerking back in surprise as he glanced at the necklace. One would think it was cursed considering that all that have had it have died. After glancing at the undead, Naruto remarked, so far, there have only been 2 people besides me. I doubt that would be considered a curse. While the other was slain by the Lich King at Silvermoon, the first ventured into Outland to repel the demon. Controlled orcs and fell into the twisting nether. Furthermore, since Sylvanus Windrunner is still the Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, it is impossible to declare her dead. After that, there was a rather awkward silence during dinner, and conversation all but died. The following day, while Voken and Hinata went in search of the Spirit of Water and Kakashi took Sasuke for chakra control training, Linthian dragged Naruto out into the forest to practice controlling the blizzard spell. Windhorn, Sergra, and Ierdni took on the duties of protecting Tizuna and watching for indications of infected individuals. Tizuna was thrilled to discover that some of them had escaped the Scourge's control, but he was informed that the Scourge outnumbered the Forsaken by almost 100 to 1, and that some of them didn't regain their minds until years after they were infected. Although he missed them, Ierdni realized that they were better off dead than possibly under Arthas' control like his wife and son were, and he could see that Tizuna was taking the possibility that Wave might need to be purged hard. It was understandable, as Ierdni had been one of the few that Mal'Ganis had taken when Arthas purged Stratholme. In the meantime, Hinata and Voken were engaged in a fascinating discussion. You're implying that this spirit will most likely differ from the ones to which you pledged allegiance? As she engaged her Byakugan and looked for potential caverns or clearings where the spirit might be, Hinata posed the question. Dese spirits have been around people who used chakra, rata and mana, so it would make sense. Furthermore, you are the first shaman to have vowed allegiance to these spirits. I assume you'll have trouble persuading this person that you mean well because of that pig Gato, Voken replied, still looking for the spirit. Voken slapped his forehead abruptly and muttered, of course, why didn't I think of this sooner? After that, Voken went to the beach, sat down cross-legged, and uttered the words, Halkananda, Sester Muntha Blader Mont Unthalnagor, in a language that Hinata was unfamiliar with. A water elemental emerged from the water and said, who dares call upon the spirits of water? I am a shaman from the Darkspear tribe, Voken declared as he rose to his feet and then knelt down, followed by Hinata. I am trying to assist this young shaman in learning the ways of the spirits. She has so far pledged her allegiance to the fire spirit and the earth spirit. I'll let the spirit of water know about your request, and in 2 days you'll know what he wants. Come back here at this time tomorrow. Back at the house, Inari was looking at the man in the black robes who had been brought in a few days earlier while Tsunami had gone into town to get some supplies. Do you want some candy, kid? The man inquired. Like any young child, Inari cheered up and said, yes, please. It's in the black pouch on my belt. There is also a powder in there that will make your grandfather's sake taste even better, the man in the black robes said with a smile. I've tried it, and it makes you feel as though you've died and entered paradise when the powder is added to sake. After running to the man's pouch, Inari reached inside and took out a clear bag of black powder and a mint. So I simply include this for Grandpa's benefit? After putting the mint in his mouth, Inari inquired. Yes, he will be grateful to you shortly, but why don't you keep this to yourself for the time being? The man smiled kindly and said, I don't think his guards will be happy with anyone putting something in the sake. The guards must have warned the foolish human brat not to take anything from a necromancer, but apparently they didn't, and now the plague would spread and the scourge would have a foothold here, so the man laughed at the child's naivete and the guard's ineptitude as Inari left the room. Unfortunately for the necromancer, he was unaware that she only infected Inari and Tazuna. Even if Tazuna had shared the infected sake, the plague only affected humans and high blood elves. When you consider that none of the other humans in the room drank sake, and that Linthian literally had no tolerance for alcohol, this meant that only 2 people were infected. Naruto, Ierdne, Windhorn, and Voken were guarding Tsunami and Inari a few days later, while the others went to the bridge with Tazuna. Ierdne had been disposed of because he had finished extracting information from the necromancer the day before, but Inari had become ill this morning, so Tsunami had put him in bed just before Tazuna and the others had left. With a sudden, "Hey Naruto," Ierdne said. "Yes, what is it?" Naruto answered. "I'm bothered by something about the brat's illness. Not in a positive way, it feels familiar." "How? What bothers me is that I haven't experienced illness in almost 5 years. I don't understand why Inari's illness is bothering me so much because it has been so long that I can't recall what it's like to be ill." "Wait, what happened to your homeland 5 years ago?" Naruto said, his head snapping up and turning pale. Before a terrified expression appeared on his face, Ierdne tilted his head to the side. While Voken and Windhorn stayed hidden, the Forsaken whispered, "For the brat's sake I hope you're wrong," and then ran inside to Inari's room, followed shortly by Naruto. Ierdne was waking Inari when Naruto dashed into her room. "Inari, we need to know something very important. The man in black left the other day. Did you take anything from him?" Naruto inquired gently. He claimed that Grandpa's sake would taste better with some candy and a powder. "Why?" Before he began to cough up blood, Inari asked. "He has the plague, shit." Tazuna was the only person who drank sake, so the necromancer must have been hoping to infect him as well as his guards. As Tsunami ascended the stairs, she saw Ierdne drawing his daggers as Inari fell to the ground, gasping and attempting to run in, but Naruto interrupted her with a mumbled, "Wait, we need to see what'll happen." With a moan, Inari pushed himself off the ground, and Naruto narrowed his eyes as Inari raised his head and began to shuffle in his direction and Tsunami's direction, his eyes vacant and dead but hungry. Ierdne muttered, "Scourge spit," and then he beheaded the undead child. "Ierdne, we must reach the bridge together. The fact that Tazuna was infected is only known to us. Tsunami can be protected by Voken and Windhorn," Naruto remarked as he led the terrified Tsunami from the room and gave her a vial of a green sleeping potion. Normally, one would have to be close to Cage level to obtain the fastest mounts that anyone could breed, but being the adopted nephew of the Banshee Queen of the Forsaken had its benefits, and Ierdne and Naruto informed Windhorn and Voken of the situation before racing down the road on their undead mounts towards the unfinished bridge. Naruto yelled, "With the luck we've been having, Zabuza and his apprentice are both undead along with any goons that Gato sends," as the wind began to whip past them. Ierdne replied, "I cannot say that I disagree with you there, and with the fact that our current luck has much to be desired, Tazuna will become undead before we get there," as the bridge came into view. The two looked at each other and nodded as they approached a dome of ice at the edge of a huge cloud of mist, where they heard fireballs and the clanking of metal on cement, as well as the sound of metal hitting metal and a loud orcish war cry. "Hi, Zabuza!" All fighting ceased when Naruto yelled. "What is it, Gaki?" The Kiri.Nin called back through the fog. "Would you like to be the first to pass away?" "No, but I had a question. Have you recently had a fever, felt hungry no matter how much you ate, and wanted to throw up all at once?" I assume the answer is yes, so let me share some news with you. The plague that destroyed the kingdom of Lordaeron has infected you. You will soon pass away and join the Forsaken or the Undead Scourge. It will be fairly simple to determine whether you are Forsaken or a member of the Scourge. If you are not, we will have to destroy you. How did you find out about all that, Gaki? How can I be certain that this isn't a fabrication? Furthermore, that disappeared this morning. Take off your hood, Ierdne, so Zabuza can observe the plague's effects, and you must be abandoned if it vanished. As the mist dissipated and the dome fell, the undead Rouge threw back his hood, and a slumped figure rose up, causing a moaning sound. Zabuza emerged from the mist and approached the icy debris and the standing figure. "Haku?" As he got closer to the phony hunter.Nin, Zabuza muttered. A mass of ice needles appeared behind her, shooting towards everyone on the bridge, including Zabuza, as Haku flashed through some hand seals. Sarah and Zabuza used their weapons to block the needles that were aimed at them, while Naruto and Linthian summoned ice shields in front of Iurni and Kakashi, respectively, and Hinata threw down a stoneskin totem that protected her, Sasuke, and Tazuna. Scourge spit, the Lich King has control over her. Iurni growled and then seemed to vanish. Then Linthian went pale, then threw an ice bolt spell at his feet, freezing them in place as Tazuna gripped his head and screamed in agony. Sasuke, Hinata, leave Tazuna alone. He has contracted the plague. As he hurled firebolts at Haku, Naruto yelled. Zabuza, destroying Haku will benefit her regardless of your feelings for her. She no longer owns her body. It is now controlled by someone else. Surgre yelled at Zabuza as she hurried over to the person she was referring to. After closing his eyes, Zabuza muttered, "Pardon me, Haku." Before charging at his former apprentice, Zabuza opened his eyes and grasped his sword. Haku drew a metal senbon and attempted to block Zabuza's sword, but her undeadness caused her to slow down too much, allowing Zabuza to decapitate her. "Ah, Zabuza, I didn't think you would possess it. An old man cannot be killed, but your brat can." "How pitiful," said a voice from the bridge's unfinished end. The undead Tazuna broke free from the ice around his feet and shuffled towards the business tycoon before anyone else could say anything. Gato just laughed before realizing that, despite the fact that his ankles and feet had been torn, Tazuna was bleeding a green ichor instead of blood. Everyone turned to see a man who barely reached up to Naruto's knee in front of an army of thugs. "Hey, so that necro bastard succeeded. Tazuna's dead and I don't even have to pay him," smiled Gato. A deep voice said, "There is also something you aren't aware of, that necro bastard also infected the food you ate," as Windhorn and Vulcan approached the bridge, followed by almost all of Wave's residents, who were armed with whatever weapons they could find. After hearing that, Gato went pale before being tackled by Tazuna and some of the thugs who had the plague kick in. While Hinata, Sasuke, and the Wave population turned green in the face, several other thugs screamed as they began to transform from living to undead, and Naruto, Kakashi, Linthian, Surgra, Iurni, Vulcan, and Windhorn watched icily as the tycoon was eaten alive. Naruto said, "Iurni, please tell me that something has been discovered as to what determines whether one becomes Scourge or Forsaken after ingesting the plague," as almost the whole thug army collapsed to their knees. "Well, the best we can say is that the likelihood of being Forsaken increases with the strength of your will." The undead retorted, "Given what we're up against, the chances are almost all will be Scourge and not Forsaken. This is my home, and I'm prepared to die to prevent those undead jerks from ever setting foot on it, so I don't care." From the center of the crowd behind the horde soldiers and ninja, a Wave citizen yelled. "Master Linthian, tell me how proficient you were in the spell you were practicing when we arrived in Konoha," Naruto inquired. Naruto made some seals of his own and sent the spell he had spent the last week mastering, and shards of ice slammed down on the approaching force of undead as they shuffled forward. Linthian blinked for a moment before smiling, and he made some hand seals as fire swirled around his hands before holding the spell as the undead army approached. Linthian said, "Once I release this spell, everyone get close and try to keep them off Naruto and I," before he opened his mouth wide and burned the 15 undead within range of the blast with a cone of fire. "Luktar Ogar," as she sliced 2 undead in 2, Surgre yelled. "Hinata, begin setting aside any totems that might be helpful during a protracted conflict." As he charged up a spell, Naruto declared, "This fight is going to last a while." Like the people of Lordaeron did half a decade ago, the people of Wave charged past the spell casters to defend their home from the Scourge, but this time it appeared that the Scourge would not prevail. A bear shifted Windhorn was tearing through the ranks of undead like a bowling ball through pins. Naruto and Linthian were using spells that affected a large area while being careful not to hit allies. Hinata and Vulcan were using totems and elemental spells to simultaneously hinder their enemies and aid their allies. Surgra and Zabuza were mowing down numerous undead with single swings of their blades. Kakashi, Iurni, and Sasuke were picking off individual undead, and the people of Wave were matching the undead with unexpected skill and ferocity. A kunai flew past his head to land in the throat of an undead behind him before detonating via explosive note, and Naruto snarled as an undead got too close for comfort and he had to use a Frost Nova spell to freeze it in place before moving back and hammering it with an arcane missile spell. The only indication that Naruto acknowledged how close he had come to death was a quick nod of thanks to Sasuke, after which he sent a firebolt over Hinata's head to slam into the face of another undead, causing the entire walking corpse to burst into flames. Naruto then froze briefly when he heard Sasuke cry out in pain, before turning to see an undead Tazuna latch onto his shoulder via bite. Shit. Windhorn saw what had happened and lumbered over before changing from bear form back to Tauren form. Naruto yelled, then blasted Tazuna off Sasuke, carrying him to the edge of the bridge and setting him down. Windhorn pulled some herbs from a pouch and applied them to Sasuke's bite wound. "I'll watch him, Naruto. You get back to the battle," he said. With his hands glowing blue, indicating that a frost spell was about to be cast, Naruto muttered, "Thanks, Windhorn," and then got up and walked back out to the bridge. This is the ideal location to test the spell that I've been working on for some time. Age of Ice. As snow started to fall and ice began to form on the bridge's surface, Naruto yelled and thrust his glowing hands forward. A minute later, all of the undead under Scourge control were completely frozen, and when the ice reached the feet of one of the mindless undead, it crept up their legs while ignoring everyone else who was using their minds. "Everyone get off the bridge, I've got something to take care of these statues," Zabuza yelled, smiling as Surgra blinked and then approached one of the ice statues, tapping the butt of her axe against it until the statue was completely broken. When they were all behind him, Zabuza focused chakra into his sword until it glowed blue, then he turned and threw it toward the frozen field, where it whirled through a line of statues, then turned like a boomerang and returned for another swath, all the while continuing to destroy the statues under Zabuza's mental control through his chakra. As Naruto stepped forward, exhausted, Zabuza grabbed his sword and said, "Hey Zabuza, I've got an offer for you." "What is Gaki?" Zabuza put his sword back on his back and asked. "I know of a way how you won't have to be hunted anymore and be with people that won't judge you for what you are." "Gaki, I'm now undead, name anyone who could possibly not automatically judge me because of that." With his hood off, Irdni stepped forward and said, "How about me?" Naruto went on, "A whole nation of undead have liberated themselves from the Lich King's rule," as Zabuza's eyes grew wide. "Since all of the other residents are undead, you won't face discrimination for being undead. In addition, my aunt is in charge of it." "But I have a question. Do I still get to fight?" Zabuza laughed. "There are still some Scourge members scattered throughout our homeland, along with a human organization known as the Scarlet Crusade, who seek to exterminate us and all undead." Under the bandages he kept on his face, Zabuza grinned as Irdni added, "You won't be short of enemies, and if those are too easy there are still the Plaguelands that are stuffed full of Scourge minions." Before returning to Windhorn to inquire about Sasuke's health, Naruto smiled slightly. "I won't tell lies," Windhorn said. "Sasuke is not going to live through the bite he got," which made Kakashi gasp in shock. Kakashi began, "Why you mean he's going to?" but Naruto interrupted. The calf here neglected to mention another facet of the plague. It is not solely transmitted by grain. You will become infected if it somehow enters your bloodstream. However, Sasuke is lucky that many of the Forsaken did not consume contaminated grain but were bitten by other undead. So Sasuke going to become undead with a likeliness of being Forsaken rather than Scourge. That is correct. But we still need to exercise caution. Even though eating contaminated grain was the main cause of the Scourge, some people were still bitten. Being bitten does not ensure that one will become Forsaken, it only raises the likelihood. Apparently Tazuna had enough of his mind to prevent him from biting his countrymen, but that was it. All of the other undead that appeared were armed, and hopefully these were the only ones infected. Kakashi nodded before turning around to assist some of the wounded. Sasuke had been the only one bitten, but there were still many who had wounds from the armed undead. "Find some people who can do damage to large areas, we need to take out Gato's base," Zabuza said calmly as he approached Naruto. After nodding, Naruto gathered Voken, Kakashi, and Linthian, and Zabuza guided them to Gato's base. Naruto whispered, "I wish we had a warlock, one quick infernal and our problem would be solved," as he peered at the dwelling. "Unfortunately we don't, we'll have to do this the old-fashioned way," Linthian stated quite coolly. After saying, "I've got an idea, I need the rest of you to make sure that none leave the building and I'll take care of the rest," Kakashi vanished. Everyone exchanged glances and shrugged before heading out to complete their tasks. Voken slammed down a totem that turned any undead into ashes. Naruto and Linthian modified a few spells to cover their walls in ice. Zabuza covered his side of the building in mist and used his silent killing to destroy any undead that entered the mist, and 5 minutes later, Kakashi gathered them all and had them pull out. "All right, Kakashi, tell me." Leaning against a tree on the same hill where they had begun, Zabuza posed the question. The whole building burst into flames as Kakashi smiled and formed a half-hand seal. Kakashi merely remarked, "I layered the entire building with explosive tags on gas pipes." Naruto remarked, "All right, we have to return to the bridge," before removing the crystal that had sealed his mount and opening the skeletal horse. Despite Tazuna's death, the people of Wave worked together to finish the bridge, and it was finished within a week. Later that night, Sasuke woke up as a Forsaken. Much to his surprised delight. With a fully developed Sharingan. It seems that he had awakened his bloodline on the bridge, and the plague advanced farther than before. Zabuza was going because, let's face it, where in the elemental countries would an undead fit in? But the other. Tsunami, are you certain you want to accompany us? The woman was asked by Naruto. The woman answered, yes, I lost my husband, my father, and my son during a 2-year period here. There are just too many painful memories, as she adjusted the bag that was slung over her shoulder. Unbeknownst to the Wave people, there would be spies in Wave to ensure that the plague was eradicated from the island nation. Naruto nodded before turning around and leaving the recuperating nation for Konoha with the others. Speaking of Wave's residents. Hey, this bridge still needs a name, one shouted. How about the Bridge of Heroes, in honor of all those that died to give this country its freedom, a different person suggested. The Bridge of Heroes is a fitting name. As the group sat around the campfire, Naruto yawned. The mission that Team 7 had to complete, Wave, would be considered a failure due to the death of the employer Tazuna, but despite this, Team 7 managed to prevent the scourge from spreading and prevented the massive undead legion from establishing a foothold in the elemental countries, even though it required backup in the form of 5 Horde members and assistance from the missing Nin turned Forsaken Zabuza. Additionally, one of Team 7's members was killed and raised as yet another Forsaken, which Sasuke was handling remarkably well. Sasuke's rebirth, for lack of a better term, was evident in subtle changes, such as grayer skin, greasier hair, a yellowish glow to the eyes, and so on. When Sasuke realized that there was no way to stop the decaying process even though he was undead, he began to worry about his eyes, but Iurtney explained that his chakra would probably replace his Sharingan once his eyes rotted away. When asked to explain, Iurtney had simply asked how some of the Forsaken, including himself, who no longer had lower jaws were still able to talk. Prior to meeting with the Shinobi nations, the Forsaken knew that some sort of internal energy was effectively replacing the things that had rotted away, such as lower jaws and eyes, for example. Looking at Tsunami, Linthian sighed and said calmly, "Lady Tsunami, I wanted to say that I am sorry for what you have lost because of the Horde's actions." After giving Linthian a perplexed glance, Tsunami asked, "What do you mean, Linthian?" "Sama. I don't see how the Horde is responsible for the Scourge's actions because they prevented Wave from becoming fully infected by the Scourge. The elemental nations were first discovered by the Horde, which is how the Scourge learned about them. So your suffering was the Horde's fault. I also apologize for not being able to personally shield you from the suffering I endured when my people were destroyed by the Scourge. Lin, please get over it for the sake of the Dark Lady. You're unaware that if the Horde hadn't discovered the elemental nations, the Scourge wouldn't have. Imagine what would have happened to Wave if that had occurred." Iurtney snapped, "You sure can be a fool sometimes for a mage. I'm not sure how he did that while missing a jaw." Linthian blinked and then looked at the fire with a look of embarrassment. Naruto laughed and then said calmly, "Master Linthian, you didn't think of that, did you? I am thankful that the Horde learned about the elemental nations because it is likely that we would be Scourge servants today if the Scourge had been present and the Horde had never gotten in touch with Konoha." "There is that," mumbled Linthian. It was interrupted by an armored figure who staggered into the clearing and muttered, in a voice halfway between that of an orc and that of the Forsaken, "I'm looking for Konoha." Surgra's eyes narrowed, and she reached for her axe, ready to strike the figure, but Linthian interrupted, saying, "Wait." Naruto and Linthian approached the figure, who was leaning against a tree, breathing heavily, and leaking green ichor from several wounds. "Haldic," Naruto muttered. Surgra growled as the identified Haldic said, "Hey midget," removing his helmet to reveal glowing ice blue eyes and extremely dark green skin. "Death Knight," the Orcess growled as she gripped her axe more tightly. Naruto smiled slightly and said, "It's okay, Surgra. Haldic left his old master and has even saved our lives on occasion." Windhorn approached the Orc Death Knight and said, "Stand aside, calf, and I'll see what I can do for his wounds." "What's a Death Knight and why does he sound a little like you?" Zabuza asked, leaning toward Iurtney. Iurtney glanced over and answered, "Death Knights are primarily active Scourge soldiers, but in recent months, a number of them have been defecting to join their own people in the Alliance and Horde. Like Warlocks and the Forsaken to some extent, they are viewed as necessary evils despite being mistrusted. Like Shinobi, they are special because they use runes, which are exclusive to them. I have no idea how they operate. I just know that they are dead, and yes, that pun was meant to give you an idea of their strength. The Lich King Arthas Menethil was a Death Knight before he fused with the previous Lich King Ner'zhul. Considering what Arthas has done, I would think that you would hate Death Knights. Don't get me wrong, I hate Arthas just as much as the next Forsaken, but I have taken a policy of judging everyone as an individual, a policy shared by most Forsaken as it is so rarely applied to us. An hour later. Let me get this right, you went undercover with a battalion of the Scourge to a village called Otogakure by taking out their Death Knight and taking his place, Naruto replied. There you observed as a treaty was made with the Auto leader. A Konoha missing. Nin by the name of Orochimaru, a further nod. The treaty basically said that the Scourge would help Orochimaru destroy Konoha during the Chunin exams coming up, along with sand and granting Orochimaru body swapping immortality in exchange for allowing to turn Auto into undead servants of the Lich King. A further nod. Then the necromancer in charge had the undead kill Orochimaru's guards before capturing Orochimaru in a magical trap and turning him into a kind of lich, only doesn't look as undead, and had a lot more chakra, another nod, at which point you were discovered and had to fight your way out and try to get to Konoha only to get lost and wind up finding us by accident. Hackdor said, that about sums it up, as he moved his arms around to relax them and revealed a bare and bandaged chest. We need to get this information to Konoha as soon as possible, so some of us will have to ride double back. Windhorn, do you think you could carry someone on your back while traveling? Linthian inquired. We have Zabuza, Sasuke, Hinata, Kakashi, and Tsunami without mounts, while Linthian, Haldik, the Calf, Voken, Surgra, me, and Ierdni have them. I think so, but my Kodo would be faster. If two were to share my Kodo, then at least one would need to be mounted by an undead creature. I believe that shinobi were faster than anything. With a puzzled expression on her face, Tsunami asked. Yes, shinobi are faster on foot than anyone else, but they lack the endurance that living mounts have been bred to have, and undead mounts do not experience fatigue. Kakashi calmly replied, shinobi are just as good as the fastest mounts for short distances, while mounts are better for longer periods of travel. The Horde's mounts, 2 undead horses, a large flightless bird known as a hawkstrider, a massive wolf, a raptor, a large beast with a forked horn called a kodo, and a heavily armored skeletal horse thing called a death charger, were visible in the cloud of smoke as those with mounts pulled out the ceiling crystals. Tsunami leapt onto Surgra's mount, the wolf, while Kakashi and Sasuke both mounted Windhorn's kodo, Hinata mounted Voken's raptor, and Zabuza shared Naruto's horse. Hold on, everyone, these mounts are some of the Horde's fastest, as the horses charged ahead, Surgra yelled. Naruto looked at his master and then relaxed when he saw the spell he was about to cast. Linthian growled a little before he began to move in the center of the group and begin to cast a spell. Those who were not accustomed to the speed of the mounts tightened their grips on the speeding mounts, either with chakra or by wrapping their arms around the one in front of them, or both. Konoha. Mass teleportation. When a huge circular diagram flashed beneath the group, Linthian yelled, and the group suddenly materialized a few yards outside the Konoha gates. We must contact Lord Hokage. As the group ran past the guards without even slowing down, Naruto yelled, those who were unfamiliar with teleportation spells. That is, those from the elemental nations minus Naruto, had to struggle to keep their stomach contents in, while the others merely led their mounts towards the Hokage tower. The crowd saw the urgency and cleared a path for the group as they made their way to the Leaf Village leader. When they arrived at the tower, the group dismounted, some needed assistance, and entered to tell the Hokage what they had learned. The door to Sarutobi's office was closed, so Surgra calmly opened it. Translation. She removed her axe and broke the door, just like she had done before the group marched in. Calmly, Naruto said, Old man, we have a serious problem. What's wrong and why? What took place during the mission? Sarutobi inquired before catching sight of Zabuza. Before you speak, let me clarify that the missing nin in your office is not the most significant issue we are facing. Orochimaru has passed away. What's wrong with that? It's a positive thing. Here in the elemental nations, Haldik went undercover with a group of the Scourge to meet with Otogakure no Sato, the village chief. According to the treaty, if they assisted Otto in destroying Konoha, the leader would grant them immortality unrelated to body swapping and turn them into undead. By making him undead, the necromancer granted him immortality. Otto's leader is Orochimaru. Otto, Suna, and the Scourge will launch an attack during the next Chunin exams. Well, damn. I reasoned that I couldn't allow my new people's ally to be destroyed, could I? Zabuza inquired. What does new people mean to you? Sarutobi reached for a kunai and asked. Throw your kunai at my arm, you'll see. before Naruto rolled his and merely took a dagger and slashed Zabuza's forearm. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes. His eyes widened in comprehension when he saw a green ichor flow out instead of blood. Sarutobi whispered, "You're one of the Forsaken now," which prompted Sasuke to come forward and say coolly, "As am I, Hokage." "Sama, you're trying to give me a heart attack, aren't you?" said Sarutobi, snapping his head in Sasuke's direction before he sighed and turned to give Naruto a mocking glare. Naruto merely smiled. 2 weeks later, Team 7, Linthian, and Hakdor were taking Zabuza to the Tirisfal Glades to show him where his new people lived, for want of a better term. The second week had been spent traveling north to leave the elemental countries, which normally took months. However, some of the Forsaken in Konoha had provided the group with endless undead mounts, so Naruto and Hakdor used their own while the others had to get used to the horses. Since Linthian was accustomed to a mount period, he had an easier time than Zabuza and the rest of Team 7, which took up the first week. In any case, the group was just leaving the northern edge of the elemental countries and was on the verge of crossing a mountain pass that led directly to the Barrens. The pass had been blocked until just before the horde made contact with Konoha, and it was cleared by accident. "Hey Naruto, you were born and raised in Konoha, right? Then why are you a mage and not a shinobi?" Zabuza asked Naruto as the group sat around the campfire halfway through the pass. As part of the deal, Master Linthian, the horde's ambassador to Konoha, agreed to take one apprentice from the shinobi program. "It was me that he picked." Writing in a journal at the time, Naruto replied, "I still couldn't get a single bunshin right, but I took to magic like a duck to water." "Are you aware of why you were unable to obtain a bunshin?" "I believe it was brought on by the enormous imbalance in my chakra as well as the mass of my chakra. During my time in the academy, I actually possessed more chakra than some cages, but it was almost exclusively physical energy rather than a balance of mental and physical energy. And I only gained more after leaving Konoha. After I left Konoha, I received mental training that counterbalanced the impact of something I can't discuss on my chakra. I basically have an almost limitless power source inside of me, but I can't use it at all." "Nani? You just claimed to have an almost limitless power source, yet you call it useless?" Sasuke yelled. "A big warrior is essentially the source of power. I'm a mage. I employ mana, which is the anger that fighters produce during combat." "So, is it possible to use both chakra and mana?" Zabuza inquired. With a sigh, Naruto said, "To be quite honest, I have no idea. I am the first mage to ever come from the elemental countries. Why not ask those from outside the elemental countries who use chakra?" After chuckling, Naruto said, "There aren't any. Chakra is only used by shinobi worldwide. I guess we could try using chakra together, Hinata and me, and if it works, we'll have a fallback option in case we can't use either one for whatever reason." Before calling Naruto over, Zabuza got up and moved to a stream close to the camp. "I want to test your ability to use both spells and jutsu. Can you still gather your chakra after I demonstrate one of the most basic water jutsu techniques taught in Kiri?" Zabuza questioned the sorcerer. Naruto formed a crude ram seal. He could hardly recall what it felt like, and said, "I'm not sure, let me try," allowing Zabuza to fix it without giving him a harsh reprimand. 1 year might not seem like much to most people, but to him, the life or death struggles and the ruthlessness of Linthian's training methods made that 1 year seem like a lifetime. 2 hours later, Naruto was still looking for his chakra, and Zabuza and Sasuke were sitting around the fire keeping watch because they didn't need to sleep. Naruto closed his eyes in concentration as he reached for his chakra. It had been so long that he barely remembered what it felt like. The first to recover were Zabuza, Linthian, and Kakashi, who turned to face Naruto, who was trying to regain control of his chakra with a look of intense concentration on his face. It seemed that the year of not using chakra had not slowed its development at all, but it did throw away what little control Naruto had previously had. Suddenly, a blast of chakra flattened both Forsaken and sent several tents over. Zabuza and Kakashi, on the other hand, had more chakra in the first wave than either of them, and Zabuza could only compare it to combining the chakra stores of both the Sandaime Hokage and the Mizukage that he had attempted to kill long ago. Kakashi could only compare it to the Kyuubi, but it lacked the feeling of anger and rage. All of the shinobi and those who had training with chakra were staring at Naruto with wide eyes, and even then Sasuke and Hinata had only haphazardly guessed how much chakra Naruto was losing. What the devil just took place? Haldic clutched his twin rune axes and mumbled. The Biju are the only things that come to mind with more chakra than Naruto, which has more than I had anticipated. In amazement at Naruto's immense chakra, Kakashi remarked, "What you felt was just a drop in the well." "Hold on, sensei. What day is Naruto's birthday?" Hinata's eyes widened as she realized what Sasuke was implying when he asked in a suspicious tone. The 10th of October, the same day of the Kyuubi attack. Naruto has the Kyuubi sealed inside of him, doesn't he? That clarifies a lot. Indeed, Naruto has already used the Kyuubi's power once, just past our current location. That is when we discovered that the fox's power was not chakra. The Kyuubi has a lot more than any other warrior I have ever encountered, but I was able to identify the feeling as warriors using their anger, Linthian said. How much more? Zabuza inquired. To put a number on it, let's say that the majority of warriors can experience anywhere from 0 to 100 rages at once. Warriors are not angry when they are not engaged in combat. For the Kyuubi, it's not the same. His anger would peak at over 1,000,000, and it would only subside during an attack. Shinobi who have survived the Kyuubi attack have told me that the chakra of the Kyuubi has a feel that is comparable to that of people who are skilled enough to sense a warrior's anger. Using the same scale for chakra, Kakashi, I would place you as maxing out at 70 while Zabuza would max out at 80. From what I was able to feel in calculating the amount of chakra that would have been naturally contained and the difference based upon that I can't completely sense chakra, Naruto was at nearly 9,000. When they heard that, everyone went pale. Naruto possessed an almost all powerful demon that was sealed inside him in addition to a great deal of raw power. Hinata muttered, there must be a catch to having that much power. Zabuza calmly replied, yeah, imagine how much trouble Naruto is going to have controlling all of that chakra. And he'll need to learn how to control it now that he's accessed it. Kakashi, please tell me that you have most of your village's chakra control exercises mastered, Zabuza added, glancing at the shinobi who was still alive. Yeah, odds are that there are several that both villages know, but we'll also have ones unique to our village, replied Kakashi. Part of my deal with the Hokage was that I wouldn't teach Kiri secrets, but in this case I'll make an exception. If Naruto doesn't learn to control his chakra, then he has enough that he could potentially destroy an entire village if it gets out of control. Linthian and Hackdor both widened their eyes, and Hackdor stumbled, he has that much power. Yes, but he can't control it. We'll talk to him about it in the morning, for now let's get some sleep. While the two Forsaken stood guard, everyone else, aside from Zabuza and Sasuke, went to bed and fell asleep. The following morning, Naruto woke up with a terrible headache and a sore body. He sat up, muttering, if this is what a hangover feels like, I'm never drinking in my life, he moaned. As the sun rose into the sky, Naruto's attention was drawn to Zabuza, who was sitting by a dying fire, by a laugh. Well Gaki, you should be proud to mostly likely be the human with the most chakra in the world. The sheer amount that you put out last night, Kakashi says, only compares to that of Biju. If any of them actually have chakra anyway, Zabuza said while muttering the final phrase. When Naruto learned that he might possess the world's largest reserves of chakra, his eyes widened. He was a mage, though. Although his chakra had previously been out of balance, it couldn't have been that bad, could it? As he completed putting his tent away, Kakashi remarked, we should get going regardless of how much chakra one of us has. Naruto nodded before beginning to enclose his belongings in crystals and putting them in his belt pouches and backpack. He was very happy that Master Linthian had taught him that, since it ultimately made things easier and simpler. The group eventually entered the Barrens, as the name suggests, a few hours later. At that moment, Kakashi began teaching Sasuke and Naruto how to control their chakras. Since we all know how much chakra Naruto possesses and Sasuke's chakra stores are significantly larger than average, the exercise was made for people with larger chakra stores, which fit both Naruto and Sasuke. Kakashi also came up with a jutsu that would be ideal for Naruto. It was one that only needed a ton of chakra and no control. Bunshin Cage. If Kakashi didn't want to commit suicide, he could only produce 10 at a time, and that was twice a day. However, Naruto created a sea of blondes instead of clones when Kakashi instructed him to use as little chakra as possible in the technique. Well, this will certainly help with chakra control, Kakashi remarked after he was able to speak normally again. One of Naruto's clones exclaimed, hey, I've still got the same amount of mana, at that moment. Naruto grinned evilly at the sound of this. He could see how this could be applied in combat. Chakra was divided equally between the number of clones and everything that the clones learned, according to Kakashi's explanation of the jutsu. However, he was a one-mage army if his mana wasn't divided among the clones. Heck, he might be able to take control of a whole ninja village by himself if he had enough clones from a sufficient distance. Not one of the major 5, but a smaller one. Every clone in the group started the chakra control exercise as soon as they left the Sea of Blondes. The group proceeded with their journey while doing that. A small group of humans, an orc, and a blood elf would be seen walking away from the sea of human blondes who appeared to be standing motionless while attempting to step on air as if they were trying to ascend stairs if any horde or alliance happened to pass by. Around the same time the following day, Naruto clutched his head and moaned in agony. "How many clones popped?" Kakashi asked, and everyone stopped. "I'd say, maybe 25, Naruto moaned as he pushed the agony away. "Have the rest of the clones disperse in groups of 10 with 5 minutes in between. Hopefully the clones will all be gone by the time we get back. If you feel up to it after the first 5 dispersals, have the clones increase the number by 5. Naruto gave his clones the mental instructions after nodding. After 5 minutes, he let out a cry and then passed out. "What the hell happened? Are we under attack?" Zabuza exclaimed as he captured Naruto. Naruto moaned, "No, dumb clones, too many, 5 groups burst, couldn't tell others had, ouch." When the others heard the reason, they all started to perspire. 5 distinct groups burst simultaneously, presumably because the clones were unable to detect when others had done so if they were unable to see them. Linthian thought about it and said, "Why don't we just stick Naruto on a mount and have him ride the rest of the way?" Kakashi, would it be easier on him if he were unconscious? Kakashi said, "Probably. Do you want one of us to knock him out?" as he approached to do so. "No, it will build up tolerance to mental pain if he has to go through all of those. If this happens often enough, then he may be able to shrug off attempts to shatter his mind completely. Mages are trained to resist effects on our minds, but priests are far better at manipulating the mind than we are." With a nod of comprehension, Kakashi gestured his horse ahead. In contrast, Naruto moaned at his master's cruel training techniques. Sasuke came to the realization that, if he had to endure the suffering that Naruto endured, perhaps possessing enough chakra to compete with the Biju wasn't the best thing in the world. "Better you than me, Blondie," Sasuke remarked, walking past the container of blonde demons. After 2 weeks, the group had reached Tirisfal Glades, where Naruto had been in agony the whole time. Naruto sensed the last 5 clones scattering as they were leaving. When he realized that something destroyed them and they didn't disperse on their own, he was able to control his excitement. Naruto frowned slightly and made the decision to mention it later. Hinata muttered, "So this is Tirisfal Glades," as she peered around. "Yup. The ruined castle you see there was once the capital of the kingdom of Lordaeron and home of the king. The last true king died when the Death Knight Arthas rammed the runeblade Frostmourne through his chest and claimed himself to be king," Naruto said as he fought off his migraine. Zabuza scratched at his elbow and remarked, "I must admit that when you told me that the scourge nearly wiped out every living thing, I was expecting more wasteland than this." As the group made their way into the remains of the once powerful castle, Naruto laughed. Even though Naruto had visited this place numerous times, he was always saddened by how easily a once powerful nation could be overthrown by a usurper. Naruto dismissed the thoughts as he entered the elevator to transport the group to the Undercity. However, he couldn't help but smile when Sasuke, Kakashi, Hinata, and Zabuza jumped when they sensed the floor below them begin to descend. Naruto said, "Calm down, this is simply the ride down to the Undercity," as those who had previously stayed in the elemental nations began drawing their weapons. Although that made them more relaxed, Zabuza and Kakashi were still prepared to grab weapons at any time. Upon reaching the bottom of the lift, those 4 flinched from the sight of the abominations on guard. They passed the abominations carelessly, and Naruto and Linthian gestured them on. After exchanging glances, the shinobi and 1 shaman proceeded deeper into the enormous underground city with their guides. They were astounded by what they saw when they emerged from the tunnel that led to the lift. In front of them were 2 levels with orcs, blood elves, tauren, trolls, and, most often, Forsaken people who were interested in buying and selling anything from armor to weapons to herbs to almost anything else you could imagine. Welcome the Undercity's trade quarter. The city is divided into different quarters, each focusing on a different area of interest. The inn is on the upper levels of the trade quarter, and it is the only place in all of Undercity that has beds, Naruto said. Hinata questioned, why? Don't the ones living here have homes? The only people who regularly visit this place are either A. Undead, who don't need to breathe, sleep, eat, drink, etc., or B. Never visit for long enough periods of time to warrant such. The War Quarter, the Rouge's Quarter, the Apothecarium, the Magic Quarter, and last but certainly not least, the Royal Quarter, are all located in Undercity, excluding the Trade Quarter. The Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, Sylvanas Windrunner, is in charge of the Royal Quarter, and her second.in command is the terrifying Varamothras. Dreadlord? Zabuza inquired. A Nethrazim or demon from the Twisting Nether. When you see him, you'll recognize him. Don't try to call yourself a demon in front of him, Zabuza. Without hesitation, he would take your life. Now, Zabuza would have kicked the ass of anyone else, but since it was Naruto and he owed Naruto a lot, he chose to believe Naruto. As soon as the group entered the royal quarter, they saw Varimathras. With his armor, wings, horns, and hoofed feet, the demon was rather difficult to miss, but only Hal, Dok, Naruto, and Linthian noticed the gray-skinned woman next to the demon. The group approached the two, and everyone except Linthian bowed or kneeled. He was the only one who got away with never doing either, and he and Sylvanas Windrunner liked it that way. Naruto could get away with it, but he still felt uneasy. My brother, Naruto. You haven't been here in a long time. You have brought Shinobi here, but why? She had married a member of the Alliance, and Sylvanas was the leader of a faction of the Horde, so she and her lone surviving sister were awkward around each other. Sylvanas asked with a smile as she looked at the only members of her family with whom she felt at ease. I'm afraid that this isn't a pleasure trip, sister. The Scourge has attempted to use their plague in the Shinobi nations, Linthian replied to his sibling. The strongest Scourge members had always had some kind of combat training in their lives, and the Shinobi nations were essentially a breeding ground for combat. The only potential benefit was that, because Shinobi were trained to withstand mental techniques, usually genjutsu, there might be a rise in the number of Forsaken. Sylvanas's red eyes widened at the news. There's another thing, too, Naruto said. We have brought the first Shinobi that is also a Forsaken with us, and Zabuza got to his feet. Sylvanas arched an eyebrow. This was intriguing, and possibly helpful to the Forsaken. He would require some testing to determine his level of combat proficiency and loyalty, but this was a huge advantage to the Forsaken. I don't see any reason why he would be turned down, but he will need to be put to the test in combat to see where he stands. All we have is what we have Forsaken. The rest of you are welcome to explore our city, but avoid the lower floors of the apothecarium, if only to avoid putting food in your stomachs. What else is there? Naruto remarked, well, my teammate Sasuke did become a Forsaken, but he would rather remain a Konoha nin than join the Forsaken for now, as Sasuke got to his feet. When I accepted this headband, I took an oath to be faithful to Konoha first. Sasuke looked Sylvanas in the eye and said, I don't want to have to break that oath, with conviction in his voice. I don't see why I should deny you that if that's what you want, brother. Are there any other surprises? When Linthian said, no, that's it, he laughed. Good, because there is something that you and Hakdor are needed to do. After taking the others on a tour of Undercity, Naruto deciphered the unspoken message and, for the first time since entering, Hakdor said, what is it, Lady Windrunner? Kael'thas. This time, what has that bastard done? He first sided with Illidan, that conceited madman, and now what? Linthian, like the majority of the Blood Elves, took the actions of their prince very personally. Although he managed to lessen their hunger, he also committed numerous unforgivable acts, whether or not they were princely. Linthian asked in an angry tone. It is reasonable to assume that he is attempting to transport Kil'jaeden to Azeroth. You must stop him on the Isle of Quel'Danas. You will encounter people from various regions of the Horde there, including some Konoha shinobi who have made the journey to Outland. You have to stop him at all costs, even if it means killing him. Linthian growled and remarked, oh, make no mistake, should Kael get in our way, I will have no hesitation in killing that traitor. Go now. Oh, and I would like to speak with you privately about something, brother, Sylvanas said, glaring at Varimathras. The Dreadlord snarled, then turned and walked out of the spacious room, followed by Hakdor. Linthian sighed, then removed the mask he had been wearing all day and allowed his face to reveal the sadness he was experiencing. 6 years already, huh? Sylvanas remarked, grinning sadly. Yes, I do miss them terribly. During those few days, our people suffered a great deal. We went from being a wealthy people to being on the verge of extinction. As his sister approached and they gave each other a family hug, Linthian added, and our family suffered as well. I know, brother, you lost your family to that bastard, and despite all that I did, I was still unable to stop him from reaching the Sunwell. I don't hold it against you. You did your best. That bastard Arthas is the only person I hold accountable for the condition of the Blood Elves. All I want to do is do more to keep my family safe. What could you have done when you were out of mana? There was nothing you could have done because you weren't a warrior or skilled with weapons. I am aware that neither of them would have held you responsible for the incident. I did my best, and you did yours. I just with that they could have met Naruto. I know that my wife would have loved him and my son would have enjoyed having an older brother. You do know that you'll have to move on sometime, right? I knew my sister.in.law well enough that she wouldn't have wanted you to mourn forever. I am not saying that you should go out and get married right after you get back from Quel'Danas, but at least move on. They're the kind of dead that doesn't come back. With tears in his eyes, Linthian remarked, I know, but it's hard. I miss them so much, recalling his family who had been slain and devoured by the scourge. As Linthian left the royal quarter, Naruto smiled sadly at him. No matter how many masks he threw up to hide his feelings, Naruto had known his master long enough to know what the elf was thinking. Sylvanas was the only person who could possibly read Linthian more accurately than Naruto. It was evident to Naruto that Sylvanas and Linthian had been discussing Linthian's family members who perished in the Scourge's attacks. Naruto had very little knowledge of them. He was aware that Linthian had a wife and son in the past. His son would have been about his own age, he knew. He was aware that his son's name was Riadriel and his wife's name was Iridata. He was aware that Riadriel had received a few months of Rouge training and that Iridata was a priestess. He was aware that the Scourge had killed them. Naruto knew very little about his master's family aside from that. I'm going to lend you my Hearthstone so that you may quickly get back to Konoha. I have something that I need to help do before I go back, Linthian said as he approached the group. Naruto questioned, family business? Partially, but a good deal of it is guild business. Naruto gave a slight nod of comprehension. Long before he arrived in Konoha, Linthian was a founding member of a guild that was now more of an organization than a guild. Its members were dispersed throughout Azeroth and Outland, completing missions and other tasks while also supporting one another when one of them needed assistance with something that they couldn't complete on their own. Although Naruto was aware that Hakdor was a member of the guild, he never learned the guild's name. Giving the name to people who weren't in it was against guild policy. Naruto would adhere to the policy, even though he did not understand it. The only issue was, how are we going to get back to Konoha? There was something that destroyed my last 5 clones, and nothing native to that area would be strong enough to do that. Hakdor tossed his Hearthstone to Kakashi and inquired, do you have your Hearthstone? Naruto struck himself in the head after blinking. These are called Hearthstones. What they do is take you to a predetermined location. All of these are set for Konoha. Once they're used, they need to recharge. You can tell when it's done recharging because the blue spiral on the stone's surface is a bright blue. The length of time that it takes for a Hearthstone to recharge is unpredictable. Sometimes it will be a few days and other times it will just be a few seconds. You can reset the location or get a new Hearthstone at any innkeeper, Linthian said, laughing as he handed one to Sasuke and another to Hinata. The inn that recently opened next to the Hokage Tower is the source of these. When they go on missions, I believe the Hokage will start giving them to Anbu and similar groups. I would be shocked if he didn't because they are surprisingly inexpensive to make. How are they activated? Sasuke shook his head up and down beside his ear as he asked. Before Hakdor responded, Naruto laughed and said, just focus on where the stone is set. All you have to do is grasp the stone to help you remember the location if you can't recall it. Gather up the strongest in the guild, we're going after Kel'Thas the traitor, Linthian said, turning from a slightly amused expression to a grave one as he turned to face the Death Knight beside him. Sasuke cocked his head before abruptly disappearing, followed by Kakashi, Hinata, and then Naruto. After a brief nod, the two went back to the elevators and parted ways, with Hakdor going to the Zeppelin Tower outside the ruins above Undercity to reach Orgrimmar, the guild's primary operational base, and Linthian going to the Orb of Translocation to take him to Silvermoon. In addition to bases in each of the capital cities, the guild had a number of safe houses strewn throughout Horde territory in both Azeroth and Outland. Their main base was in Orgrimmar, with 2 secondary bases in Thunderbluff and Silvermoon. By the time they reached the strength that Linthian, Hakdor, Windhorn, and others possessed, the majority of the Horde's members who weren't permanently stationed somewhere belonged to a guild, though some were lone wolves, for lack of a better term. While some of them collaborated with other members of the Horde on a regular basis and did so exceptionally well, one in particular dealt a fatal blow to the Black Dragon Onyxia before he died from wounds sustained earlier in the battle. After shaking himself out of his reverie as the disorientation from using the Orb of Translocation subsided, Linthian hurried out of the room behind Silvermoon's throne room, bowing briefly to the Regent Lord Lorthamar Theron of Quel'Thalas before approaching the current Blood Elf leader and saying, I am sure that you are aware of what Kel'Thas the traitor is planning. After giving a nod, Lorthamar stated, those from other guilds have already begun to assemble, and you and any other members of your guild will meet just outside. All of you will be dispatched in the morning. After giving a nod, Linthian departed the Sunfury Spire and made his way to Silvermoon, the guild's base. The group that had assembled to finally kill Kel'Thas was leaving 2 hours later, not bothering to wait for morning. As this was going on, Team 7 of Konoha was happily training, or rather, Kakashi was happily putting them through a number of rather extreme torture methods that were disguised as training. For example, he had Naruto walk up a waterfall with a boulder strapped to his back while he himself would chuck kunai at him at random. Sasuke was being chased by a pack of nindogs for speed training, and Hinata was being forced to spar with a clone of Kakashi without the use of any spells or totems. They had been doing this ever since they returned to Konoha, and the genin were quite frankly exhausted. 7 hours after they began, Kakashi finally called it quits for the day and poofed away with instructions to be at those training grounds the following day at 7 a.m. sharp. As the building where his previous apartment was located was destroyed by fire, Naruto tiredly called out to his mount and flopped onto its saddle before it began to trot towards the Sarutobi estate, where he was staying until he could find a new apartment. One option that Naruto was thinking about was finding someone from the other parts of the horde and staying with them. Surgra had told him that there was an entire apartment block that contained only trolls, orcs, Tauren, Forsaken, and Blood Elves, so he might get one of those apartments. When 7 o'clock rolled around, Kakashi emerged in a cloud of smoke, handed each of them a slip of paper, and declared, "I have nominated the 3 of you for the Chunin exams starting next week." Naruto had arrived at the training grounds approximately 5 minutes early the following day and began stretching to relax. Sasuke and Hinata also arrived and began their own stretches during this time. "You are free to enter or not, but I will advise against going to people who have already done so because different horde members have added their own twists and ideas to this year's event. The exam starts on Monday at the academy in room 301. Until then, no group training." Kakashi poofed away at that moment. When it finally dawned on Team 7 that they were qualified for the Chunin exams, they gazed at their forms in astonishment. Although most Chunin didn't become Chunin through the exams anyway, the majority of genin didn't enter until they were a year or 2 older than them. "Fill these out at the Uchiha complex," Sasuke asked calmly after the 3 exchanged glances. Naruto and Hinata simply nodded, and the 3 of them quickly made their way to the Uchiha complex to begin working on their forms. Knowing they were talking about genjutsu or ninjutsu, Naruto questioned, "Favored jutsu? What the heck am I supposed to put here?" Hinata jotted down her own response and said, "Just put down the only jutsu that you have, Kage Bunshin." "Blood type, Ichor," mumbled Sasuke, laughing. Naruto smiled slightly and said, "I don't think that would be a bad response, considering that your body should start to decompose here soon." "Parent and or guardian, I guess I should put down Master Lintheion. I'm not sure if I should put Sylvanas down or not. I'd say not." In a methodical manner, the 3 completed their applications, providing just enough details to meet the requirements but not enough for anyone who discovered the forms to use against them. The 3 of them met the following day to discuss different approaches for potential necessities. They prepared for every scenario they could think of because they had no idea what would happen to them. They had enough food to last them a week if they were to carefully ration it after Naruto appeared one day in a rather large training area. Hinata bought a variety of herbs and other materials for some potions she was learning to make. Sasuke acquired a number of poisons to apply to their weapons, some of which were effective just by coming into contact with the skin. When Team 7 got to the academy the next Monday, they made the decision to enter the building in a different way. Hinata gave Naruto and Sasuke an invisibility potion, and after they had finished drinking it, she went through one of the open windows into the room where the exam was being held, glad that Windhorn had taught her the new potion. Since they arrived 3 hours early, they were the first people in the room and began setting up different remote traps that would only activate remotely. Naruto's past pranking skills were useful. A Suna team comprising a redhead, a blonde with a battle fan on her back, and a makeup-clad Batman Wanna.be was the first to enter, followed naturally by Team 7. When Team 7 realized that the final one was the same person who had been harassing the Hokage's grandson 2 days prior, their eyes narrowed. Without even blinking, Naruto had frozen the joints of his battle puppet to intimidate the nin. Then, in a whirl of sand, the redhead had emerged. The gourd on the redhead's back was infused with demonic energy, which Naruto immediately noticed. It had the same repulsive vibe that Naruto gets when a warlock calls forth a demon around him, but it wasn't quite mana or chakra either. That put him on Naruto's avoid at all costs radar right away. Naruto had a suspicion that the boy had a demon and was similar to him. Naruto believed that the Suna genin had a real demon inside of him, even though his own demon was just an extremely strong animal and not a true demon. Naruto shared his thoughts on the Suna genin with both of his teammates, and during their time together, they also bought anti-demon seals. The number of teams entering the room increased over the course of the following hour until Team 7 felt secure enough to unleash the effects of the invisibility potions. A built-in off switch that could be mentally flipped before the potion wore off was incorporated into all potions. But after that, the potion's effects vanished, necessitating the consumption of another. After 10 minutes of deactivating their invisibility potions, Team 7 approached the entrance and shook their heads in laughter when they saw 6 other Academy members. Apparently, Teams 10 and 8 had also received nominations for the Chunin exams. "Hey Naruto, Hinata, Sasuke over here," exclaimed a loudmouth person named Kiba as they approached. A pair of voices yelled, "Sasuke-kun," just before 2 human missiles struck the Forsaken Genin. Naruto recently came up with a new strategy, which Sasuke adopted. He leapt to the ceiling and used chakra to hold on to it. Sasuke had been standing in a rather odd position when the 2 missiles, named Sakura and Ino, crashed into the floor a few feet behind him. Ino was on top of Sakura, sandwiched between her legs, while Sakura was on the bottom, her legs spread wide. All it took for them to get up and start glaring at one another was a camera flash. As he sealed the camera into a unique crystal that could only be opened with his blood infused with both ice mana and chakra, Naruto shook his head in laughter. An older, glasses-wearing genin approached the group at that moment and said, "You should keep it down. Some of the others here have short tempers." As Sasuke descended from the ceiling beside him, Naruto said coolly, "If a small group of shinobi are enough to cause one to lose their temper, they shouldn't be here. Besides, if they really belonged here, then they wouldn't bother worrying about us." "Well, yes, there is that, but even so you should watch yourselves. This is my 7th time taking these exams and let me tell you they are not easy. There are some benefits though," at which point the genin pulled out a deck of playing cards. "These are my ninja information cards, ninfo for short. They react with my chakra and contain information about just about everybody in these exams." Naruto inquired, "Can we see the cards on Team 7 of Konoha?" After nodding, the teenager pulled out 3 cards, pumped his chakra into them, and they were quickly removed. Sasuke soon discovered that the card he was carrying contained no information about his undead status. Hinata's shamanic skills were nothing. However, Naruto had knowledge about the Kyuubi that he was unable to make public. The card burst with flame, destroying it. When Hinata and Sasuke realized the reasoning behind it, they destroyed their own cards. Smiling, Team 7 turned and headed for the desks as a cloud of smoke began to rise and a deep, guttural voice said, "Take a seat. The first stage of the Chunin exams has begun." The Junin senseis, meanwhile, had to wait in a lounge area to ensure that they did not assist their students in any way. Additionally, a few members of other Horde branches were present for a 10-minute break. "You have your genin in the Chunin exams, right?" One of them, a battle-scarred orc wearing plate armor, asked the rookies, senseis. Kakashi said, "Yes, what of it?" as he raised his head from his book. The orc smiled savagely and replied, "I hear that they somehow called an old friend of the warchiefs to proctor the first exam. I admit to being curious about how your Hokage managed to convince Rexer to stop in a place for longer than a week." When Kurenai learned that Rexer would be the Chunin exam's first proctor, she froze. Kakashi questioned, "Who is Rexer?" after the other 2 senseis failed to recognize the name. Rexer is one of the Mokonothal clan, a clan known for having a large number of members who are half orc and half ogre. Rexer in particular has been granted the title of champion of the Horde and almost single-handedly stormed Theramore and killed Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. "Consider ourselves fortunate that our students don't have to fight him, otherwise none of them would have a chance of beating him," said Kurenai. When Naruto realized who their proctor would be, he went pale alongside the students. "There will be no fighting of any kind in this part of the exam unless I say so. This part will be a written test to see how much you know. Normally the written test would be about various aspects of your career within the elemental nations, but this year the Horde is in charge of the exam. You start out with 10 points, 1 point for each question. Any cheating costs you 2 points. You need 5 points to pass. If any member of your team fails, the entire team fails. You have 1 hour to finish. Once you get your test you may begin," Rexer growled throughout the speech, completely covering up all those in attendance. Naruto relaxed after learning the purpose of the test. He most likely had the best chance of passing out of all the genin present. That year overseas would be useful. But when he got his test, he went pale. The test was written in Thalasian, Orc script, kanji, and a small portion of Tauren's pictographic alphabet. To make passing even possible for most people, 5 of the questions were written in kanji. 2 of the questions were written in Thalasian, 2 in the Orc script, the name of which Naruto never learned, and the final question was written in Tauren. Rexer smiled and said, "One last rule, all questions must be answered in the language that they are written in." Naruto glanced at his test right away and quickly figured out the Orc and Thalasian questions. He knew enough of those two languages to be able to respond. While the ones in Orc focused on the period when they were still residing in Draenor, the ones in Thalasian focused on the homeland of the Blood Elves and the Scourge's attack. Because he didn't know as much about that era and his vocabulary wasn't as extensive as his Thalasian, Naruto found the Orc questions more challenging. Geographical questions made up the majority of the kanji questions. The name of the kingdom of Orcs, the location of Undercity, etc. He had to leave that response alone, though, because he was unable to read Torin's written version. His team as a whole was doing well. Since they had actually been outside the elemental nations, their team had the most interaction with people from outside of them. Sasuke and Hinata utilized their dujutsu to either copy or locate the right answers for the ones written in the various languages. They were the only team that truly completed their tasks before the hour or half was up. Most of the non-Konoha teams were performing surprisingly well. Naturally, Konoha and its ninja teams knew the most about the lands outside of the elemental nations, but they weren't keeping the information they were asked secret. All of this information was already known to the Horde's enemies, who would have had to be living under a rock to be unaware of it. Many teams were found to have engaged in cheating, and when someone was found to have done so twice, they were expelled from the exam room because they could not possibly pass. A female troll dressed in mage robes gathered the tests at the end of the hour and handed them to an Orcess wearing the typical attire of shinobi. After a brief handseal that Team 7 members identified as being for the Cage Bunshin, 10 Orcs in all divided up the papers and quickly graded the questions in Orc before handing them off to a group of Tauren who graded the questions in their own words. A group of Blood Elves in various types of armor graded their own set of questions after the Tauren. The last 5 questions were then graded by a team of shinobi. Each proctor in attendance took a paper from one of the 2 piles of tests. Now before we reveal who passed and who didn't, there will be a final twist. If you don't perform adequately, then you and your team will fail. You will have to fight me individually, Rexer joked. You may choose to not face me in combat, but if you do then you and your entire team will be failed. Should you choose to face me, well, I may not be able to stop my axes in time for you to keep your head attached to your neck. You have 5 minutes to decide, Rexer said as he removed the axes from his. Naruto went pale. He was aware that none of the genin could possibly defeat Rexer, particularly if Misha, his companion bear, joined in the altercation. Furthermore, he doubted that Rexer would actually carry out his threat. Since Naruto had never met him before, all he knew about him was his fighting prowess. He had no idea about his character. He had never had to make a decision as difficult as this one. Naruto got up as more teams gave up as the 5 minutes approached.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.